The woman they called property died in those mountains, but the one who survived destroyed an empire. Clara Mercer didn't know she was cargo until the train crossed into Montana territory. By then, the marriage contract her desperation had signed became chains she couldn't break. Gideon Mercer waited at Black Hollow Ranch like a king expecting tribute, his first wife already buried under whispers no decent person would repeat. What happened next wasn't rescue or romance. It was war fought in silence, rebellion built in shadows, and one freezing night when a terrified girl chose death over surrender. This is that story. Hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this reaches. Let's begin. The telegram arrived on the worst possible day. Clara Mercer stood in the cramped office of Feldman and Sons Collection Agency, staring at yellow paper that smelled like cheap ink and cheaper promises. Outside, Chicago's meatpacking district bellowed with afternoon shift changes, men shouting, cattle lowing, the clang of metal on metal that never quite stopped. Inside, Mr. Feldman watched her with the patient expression of a man who delivered bad news so often it no longer registered as cruelty. "Montana," Clara said. Her voice came out flat, hollow. "Montana," Feldman confirmed. He adjusted his spectacles, glanced at the file open on his desk. "Black Hollow Ranch, Gideon Mercer. Cattle operation, from what I understand. Substantial holdings." Clara's hands trembled. She pressed them against her threadbare skirt, felt the rough cotton catch on calluses she'd earned scrubbing floors in boarding houses after her father's factory job disappeared, after the drinking started, after everything that mattered turned to ash. And this contract. She couldn't make herself say marriage. The word stuck in her throat like a bone. Feldman slid a document across the desk. Heavy paper, official seals, words that blurred together when Clara tried to focus. She caught fragments. Debt settlement, legal transfer, binding agreement. "Your father signed it 3 weeks before he passed." Feldman's tone suggested he'd explained this already, possibly more than once. "The terms are clear. Mr. Mercer paid the outstanding balance, $743.18. In exchange, you fulfill the contract your father negotiated on your behalf." "On my behalf?" Clara's laugh came out wrong, sharp and brittle. "He sold me. He secured your future." Feldman closed the file with a soft thump. "Miss Mercer, I understand this is difficult, but your alternatives are limited. The boarding house wants 2 months back rent. The grocers refused further credit. Without this arrangement, you're looking at the workhouse or worse." Worse. Clara knew what that meant. She'd seen girls from the tenements end up on Van Buren Street, hollow-eyed and too thin, selling the only thing the city hadn't already taken. She looked down at the telegram again, neat handwriting, masculine and controlled. "Arrangements complete. Stop. Arrival expected April 12th. Stop. Travel expenses provided. Stop." G. Mercer. No greeting, no warmth, just facts delivered like inventory. "When?" Clara asked. "The train leaves Thursday morning, 6:15 from Union Station." Feldman produced an envelope, set it beside the contract. "Ticket, travel allowance, instructions for changing trains in Omaha. Everything you need. Everything except a choice." Clara picked up the envelope. The paper felt expensive between her fingers, thick and cream-colored. Money she couldn't refuse buying a future she couldn't escape. "What do you know about him?" She hated how small her voice sounded, hated the fear that made her ask. "About Mr. Mercer." Feldman hesitated. That pause stretched a moment too long. "He's a businessman, successful by all accounts, established." "And his first wife?" Another pause. Feldman's expression closed down, professional distance snapping into place like a door swinging shut. "I believe she passed away last year. Beyond that, Miss Mercer, the details of Mr. Mercer's household aren't really—" "How did she die?" "I don't have that information. Can't or won't." Feldman stood, signaling the conversation's end. "The train leaves Thursday at 6:15. I suggest you use the next 3 days to prepare. Settle your affairs. Say your goodbyes." Clara stood too, legs unsteady. She folded the telegram, tucked it into her pocket alongside the envelope. The contract remained on Feldman's desk, already signed by parties she'd never met, sealing a future she'd never chosen. "And if I refuse?" Feldman's expression didn't change. then the debt comes due immediately. All of it. And I'm required by law to pursue collection through whatever means necessary. The workhouse, Van Buren Street, worse. Clara walked out into Chicago's gray April afternoon, into air thick with smoke and the copper smell of blood from the slaughterhouses. She walked past the boarding house where Mrs. Kowalski waited with crossed arms and a ledger full of red ink. Walked past Halloran's grocery, where her father used to buy tobacco back when he still had wages. Walked until her feet hurt, and the city's noise faded to a dull roar in her ears. She ended up at the train yard, watching locomotives arrive and depart with their loads of cargo and passengers, all of them headed somewhere that wasn't here. Montana. The word felt foreign. Clara had never been west of the Chicago River, never been anywhere really, except the 6-block radius that defined her entire world. Factory district, boarding houses. The Catholic church where her mother was buried, the public school she'd left at 14 to work. Now she'd travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. Not marry, be delivered to. Thursday morning arrived colder than it had any right to be in mid-April. Clara stood on the platform at Union Station with a single carpet bag containing everything she owned: 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's rosary, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. 23 years of life reduced to 15 pounds of fabric and memory. The locomotive sat massive and indifferent on the tracks, steam rising from its belly like breath from some iron beast. People surged around Clara, families, businessmen, farmers in rough clothes heading back to land they'd left behind. Everyone moving with purpose, with destinations they'd chosen. "Miss Mercer?" Clara turned. A thin man in a conductor's uniform held a clipboard, checking names against a list. "Yes. Car 7, seat 12. Here's your meal voucher for the dining car." He handed her a slip of paper, barely glanced at her face. Just another passenger, just another piece of cargo being shipped west. Clara climbed aboard. The passenger car smelled like coal smoke and old upholstery, benches worn smooth by countless travelers. She found seat 12, shoved her bag into the overhead storage, and sat by the window. The train lurched forward. Buildings slid past, then neighborhoods, then the sprawl of Chicago giving way to farmland that stretched flat and endless under a colorless sky. Clara pressed her forehead against the glass, watched her city disappear. This is survival, she told herself. This is what women do. We survive. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and resignation, something else stirred, something that felt uncomfortably like rage. The journey took 6 days. Chicago to Omaha, Omaha to Cheyenne, Cheyenne to Billings, each leg on a different train, each depot more remote than the last. The landscape transformed around Clara like pages turning in a book about a world she didn't recognize. Endless prairie became rolling hills, became mountains that thrust up from the earth like teeth. The other passengers changed with the geography. Businessmen in suits gave way to ranchers in leather coats, families heading to homesteads, prospectors seeking gold or silver or whatever other dreams the frontier promised to men with strong backs and weak morals. Clara kept to herself. She ate in the dining car only when hunger overwhelmed caution, spoke only when spoken to, spent hours staring out windows at country that grew increasingly harsh, increasingly beautiful, increasingly wrong. In Omaha, an older woman sat beside her during the 2-hour layover. Mrs. Brennan heading to her son's ranch in Wyoming. She had kind eyes and flowers still under her fingernails from baking before her departure. "First time west?" Mrs. Brennan asked. "Yes." "Family out there?" Clara hesitated. "I'm getting married." Mrs. Brennan smiled, the expression warm and completely ignorant. "How wonderful. Is he a rancher? They say Montana's cattle country, some of the best grazing land in the territories." "I don't know much about him." The admission felt like weakness. "We haven't met." The smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Brennan glanced away, then back, choosing her words carefully. "Mail order arrangement?" Clara nodded. "Well," Mrs. Brennan patted her hand. The gesture was meant to be comforting. It felt like condolence. Those often work out just fine. Better than a hasty courtship sometimes. You'll build something together. That's what the frontier's for. New starts. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said, "I'm sorry." They didn't speak again after boarding. Mrs. Brennan got off in Cheyenne, and Clara was alone with her thoughts and the mountains rising ahead like walls designed to keep people out. Or in. The telegram had said April 12th. Clara arrived in Billings on April 11th, one day early due to good weather and efficient connections. The depot was barely more than a platform with a ticket office, nothing like Union Station's grand architecture. Mountains loomed in every direction, still capped with snow despite spring's arrival in the lowlands. Clara stood with her carpet bag, watching the train pull away in a cloud of steam and cinders. She was the only passenger who'd disembarked. The platform cleared fast, leaving her alone except for a clerk inside the ticket office and a wagon parked near the hitching post. The wagon's driver leaned against the boards, watching her. He was maybe 60, lean and weathered like old wood left too long in the sun. His eyes were the palest blue Clara had ever seen. "You the Mercer bride?" His voice carried across the platform. Clara's stomach clenched. "I'm Clara Mercer." "Silas Boone, Mr. Mercer sent me to collect you." He straightened, moved toward her with a loose-limbed stride that spoke of decades on horseback. "Didn't expect you until tomorrow." The connections were good. Silas studied her face with an expression she couldn't read. Then he picked up her carpet bag without asking permission and headed for the wagon. "We've got 3 hours of daylight left. Ranch is 2 hours out. We should move." Clara followed because she had no other option. The wagon was rough-built but sturdy, bed empty except for some burlap sacks and coiled rope. Silas tossed her bag and back, then offered his hand to help her up to the bench seat. His palm was calloused as tree bark. He hauled her up like she weighed nothing. They left Billings behind. The road, really just two-wheel ruts through scrub and grass, wound north into country that grew emptier with each passing mile. Mountains flanked them on both sides, massive and indifferent. The skies stretched so wide Clara felt exposed, like something was watching from above. Silas didn't speak. He guided the horses with casual expertise, gaze scanning the landscape with the automatic attention of someone who'd traveled this route 1,000 times. Finally, Clara couldn't stand the silence. "What's he like?" She kept her voice level. "Mr. Mercer." Silas was quiet long enough that Clara thought he might not answer. Then, "He's a hard man, fair by his own measure. Expects things done his way." "And his first wife?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Dead. I know that. How did she—" "Ranch work's dangerous." Silas cut her off, tone flat. "Accidents happen." It wasn't an answer. It was a wall. They drove on. The sun slid toward the western peaks, light turning golden, then orange, then blood red. The temperature dropped. Clara wrapped her thin coat tighter, wished she'd thought to bring something warmer. "There." Silas pointed ahead. Clara followed his gesture and felt her breath catch. Black Hollow Ranch sat in a valley where the mountains pulled back slightly, creating a bowl of grassland fed by a creek that glinted silver in the dying light. The main house was 2 stories, timber and stone, solid as a fortress. Outbuildings clustered around it, barns, bunkhouse, storage sheds, a smokehouse. Corrals held horses and cattle. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. It looked prosperous, established, permanent. It looked like something that couldn't be escaped. "Big operation," Silas said. 3,000 head of cattle, 200 horses. 50 hands during season, 20 year-round. Mr. Mercer built this from scratch. Came out here with nothing. Now he's got an empire. An empire. Clara stared at the ranch growing larger as they descended the valley road. She thought about colonies and kingdoms, and all the words history used to describe places where some men ruled and others obeyed. The wagon rolled past the first outbuilding. A few ranch hands stopped working to watch. Their faces were careful, expressions neutral. Nobody waved, nobody smiled. Silas pulled the wagon up to the main house. Up close, it was even more imposing. Windows like dark eyes, door thick enough to stop a bullet, everything built for durability rather than beauty. The door opened before Clara could move. The woman who emerged was maybe 50, dressed in black from collar to hem, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her face was hard planes and sharp angles, no softness anywhere. "You're early." She spoke like Clara had committed an offense. "The train—" "I'm Evelyn Pike. I run this household." She looked Clara up and down, cataloging every patch and stain on her traveling clothes. "Mr. Mercer's in the north pasture, Won't be back until supper. Come inside. I'll show you to your room." Clara climbed down from the wagon. Her legs felt unsteady after 2 hours of jostling. Silas handed down her carpet bag, gave her a look that might have been sympathy or warning or both. Then he drove the wagon away, and Clara was alone with Evelyn Pike. The interior of the house matched its exterior, solid, functional, devoid of warmth. Dark wood paneling, heavy furniture, rugs that muffled footsteps. Everything clean and ordered and cold. Evelyn led Clara through rooms without speaking. Parlor, dining room, kitchen, where a younger woman worked at the stove and didn't look up. Stairs to the second floor, a hallway lined with doors, all closed. "This is your room." Evelyn pushed open a door near the end of the hall. "You'll take your meals with the household. Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, supper at 7. Mr. Mercer expects punctuality." The room was small. Single bed with an iron frame, dresser, washstand, window that looked out toward the mountains. No decoration, no pictures or curtains or anything suggesting human comfort. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. "You'll share with the household staff." Evelyn set Clara's carpet bag on the bed. "Unpack, wash if you need to. Supper's in 40 minutes, don't be late." She left. The door clicked shut with a sound like a cell locking. Clara stood in the center of her room, her cell, and felt the weight of everything pressing down. The journey, the contract. The ranch spread out below the mountains like a kingdom carved from dirt and grass and other people's labor. She moved to the window. From here she could see the creek, the corrals, the bunkhouse, where smoke rose from a chimney. Beyond that, nothing but land stretching to the mountains. Miles of emptiness. No towns, no neighbors, no escape. Clara pressed her palm against the glass. It was cold under her hand. This is survival, she told herself again. But the rage in her chest had grown during the journey. It burned hotter now, fed by every mile traveled, every choice stolen, every moment of pretending this was somehow normal. She turned from the window, unpacked her few belongings into the dresser drawers, washed her face and hands in the basin, cold water shocking against her skin, changed into her least damaged dress, a dark blue cotton that had been her Sunday best back when Sunday meant something. When the knock came, she was ready. "Supper!" Evelyn called through the door. Clara followed her down to the dining room. The table could seat 12, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. Only 4 places were set, head, foot, and 2 along the side. Crystal glasses caught lamplight. Silver gleamed. 2 men were already seated. The first was old, maybe 70, with a white beard and gentle eyes. He stood when Clara entered, offered a small bow. "Thomas Hargrove, miss, ranch accountant." "Clara Mercer." "A pleasure." The second man didn't stand. He was younger, maybe 35, handsome in a cold way. Dark hair, pale eyes, features that would have been attractive if they held any warmth. Evelyn gestured to the side chair. "Sit." Clara sat. Thomas returned to his seat. The young man watched her with the expression of someone examining livestock. "Warren Cahill," he said finally. "Mr. Mercer's business partner. I handle sales and contracts." Of course he did. Clara nodded, didn't offer her hand. The kitchen girl brought food. Roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. Portions were generous, the quality better than anything Clara had eaten in months. Her stomach growled despite the tension coiling in her gut. They ate in near silence. Thomas asked polite questions about her journey. Clara gave short answers. Warren said nothing, just watched her with those pale eyes. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "Mr. Mercer will return by 8. He'll want to see you then. There are expectations, rules for the household. It's best you understand them clearly." Clara set down her fork. "What kind of rules?" "The kind that keep this ranch running smoothly." Evelyn's voice was flat. "Mr. Mercer values order, discipline. He built this empire from nothing, and he won't tolerate chaos in his home." "I'm not chaos. You're a disruption." Warren spoke for the first time since his introduction. "The last wife disrupted the household. That didn't end well." The room went cold. Thomas cleared his throat, shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or warning. "What happened to her?" Claire asked. Nobody answered. "What happened to Gideon Mercer's first wife?" That's not appropriate dinner conversation. Evelyn stood, began collecting plates even though Clara had barely touched her food. You'll meet Mr. Mercer soon enough. He'll explain what he expects. Clara stood too. I'd like to go back to my room. Sit down. Warren's voice cracked like a whip. We're not finished. Clara remained standing. Rage pulsed hot in her chest, drowning the fear. I'm not your employee, Mr. Cahill, or your property. Not yet. Warren smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. The wedding's in 4 days. After that, you'll be exactly that. Warren, that's enough. Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. He looked at Clara with something like pity. Miss Mercer, please excuse Mr. Cahill's directness. We're all adjusting to changes in the household. If you'd like to retire, that's perfectly reasonable. Clara didn't wait for permission. She walked out of the dining room, back up the stairs, into her small, cold room with its single window, looking out at mountains that blocked the horizon. She sat on the bed. Her hands were shaking. 4 days until the wedding. 4 days until the contract becomes unbreakable. Clara thought about her father, drunk and desperate, signing papers that sold his daughter to pay debts he'd accumulated through weakness and bad choices. Thought about Feldman's office, the careful way he'd avoided her questions about Gideon Mercer's first wife. Thought about the whispers no decent person would repeat. She thought about the workhouse, Van Buren Street, all the terrible alternatives that had brought her here. Then she thought about Warren Cahill's cold smile, Evelyn Pike's iron control, the ranch hands who wouldn't meet her eyes, Silas Boone's flat voice saying, ranch work's dangerous, accidents happen. Clara stood, walked to the window, looked out at the empire Gideon Mercer had carved from wilderness, the kingdom where she was meant to be queen, or prisoner, or both. The mountains were black against the last light. The creek ran silver. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle moved through grass that would keep them fed and profitable. Somewhere, men obeyed orders because Gideon Mercer had built a system where obedience was the only option. Clara pressed her hand against the cold glass. This is survival, she thought one last time. Then, or it's war. Tmante. The sound of hoofbeats pulled Clara from uneasy sleep. She'd been dreaming of Chicago, of her mother's grave covered in snow, of her father's signature on papers she couldn't read. She sat up. Moonlight came through the window, painting everything silver blue. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Voices rose from below, deep, male, commanding. Clara slipped from bed, moved to the window, looked down. A man stood in the yard, still holding his horse's reins. Even from above, even in darkness, his presence was massive. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that made him look even larger. He said something to Silas, who'd emerged from the bunkhouse. Silas nodded, took the horse, led it toward the barn. The man turned toward the house. Lamplight from the kitchen spilled across his face for one moment. Clara saw dark hair graying at the temples, a beard cut close to his jaw, eyes that caught the light and reflected it back cold as stone. Gideon Mercer, her future husband, her owner. He looked up, straight at her window. Clara jerked back, heart hammering. She pressed against the wall beside the window, breathing hard. Did he see her? Could he tell she'd been watching? Below, the front door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the floor. A door shut somewhere deep in the house. Clara waited in the darkness, listening to the ranch settle into night sounds. Wind in the eaves, cattle lowing in distant pastures, her own pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't sleep again that night. When dawn came gray and cold through her window, Clara rose, washed in freezing water from the basin, dressed in her blue cotton, the one that was already wearing thin at the elbows, brushed her hair and pinned it back with hands that only shook a little. Then she went downstairs to meet the man who believed he owned her. The dining room was empty. Clara stood in the doorway, uncertain, when Evelyn appeared from the kitchen. He wants to see you. In his office. She pointed down the hall. Last door on the left. Clara's stomach twisted. Now? Now. The hallway seemed longer than it had yesterday. Clara's footsteps sounded too loud on the polished floor. She reached the last door, raised her hand, knocked. Come. She opened the door. The office was lined with books and maps, a massive desk dominating one end. Behind the desk, Backlit by a window that framed the mountains sat Gideon Mercer. Up close, he was somehow both exactly what Clara expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Older than she thought, maybe 45. Handsome in a brutal way, all hard edges and controlled power. He wore dark wool, expensive but practical, nothing flashy. His hands were folded on the desk, scarred and capable. His eyes were the coldest thing Clara had ever seen. Sit. Clara sat in the chair across from him. Her hands gripped her skirt. She forced herself to meet his gaze. You arrived early. Gideon's voice was deep, measured. I hadn't planned to meet you until tonight. The trains ran well. So I heard. He leaned back slightly. I've read your file. 22 years old, father deceased, no other family, limited education, some domestic work experience, debts totaling $743.18. He paused. Do I have that right? Clara's throat was dry. Yes. Those debts are now cleared. Your father's contract has been fulfilled. As of this moment, you owe nothing to anyone in Chicago. Do you understand? Yes. Except to me. Gideon leaned forward. The contract your father signed transferred those debts to my account. I've paid them in full. In exchange, you've agreed to marriage and the obligations that entails. Do you understand that as well? The rage flared again. Clara swallowed it down. I understand the contract. Good. Then we're clear on the terms. Gideon stood. He was even larger standing, filling the space behind his desk like a monument to his own power. The wedding will be Saturday. Small ceremony, just the household and a judge from Billings. Evelyn will help you prepare. After the ceremony, you'll assume the duties of mistress of this ranch. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Clara stood too, refused to be looked down on. What duties? Managing the household, supporting my work, hosting when necessary. He paused, eyes boring into her, providing an heir. There it was, the truth beneath the contract, not a wife, a vessel. And if I can't? Clara heard her own voice like it belonged to someone else. If I can't give you an heir? Something flickered across Gideon's face. Rage, maybe, or memory. You will, he said flatly. You're young and healthy. There's no reason to expect failure. Like the first wife failed, Clara thought. Like she couldn't give you what you wanted, so you... She stopped that thought, forced her voice steady. I'd like to speak plainly, Mr. Mercer. Go ahead. I didn't choose this. My father chose it. I'm here because the alternative was destitution. But I'm not cargo. I'm not livestock. I'm a human being, and I expect to be treated as one. The silence that followed pressed down like a physical weight. Gideon stared at her with those cold eyes, expression unreadable. Clara held her ground, though every instinct screamed to run. Finally, Gideon spoke. This ranch works because everyone knows their place. The cattle know where they graze. The horses know when they work. The men know what I expect. Order creates prosperity. Chaos creates failure. He moved around the desk, each step deliberate. My first wife didn't understand that. She fought the natural order. She made herself miserable, resisting what could have been simple. What happened to her? Gideon stopped 3 feet from Clara. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. Size, power, absolute certainty. She fell, late pregnancy, unstable on her feet. A terrible accident. You're lying. The words hung in the air between them. Clara watched Gideon's expression shift, surprise, then anger, then something colder, more dangerous. You just arrived, he said quietly. You know nothing about this ranch or what happened here. I suggest you remember that. I know when I'm being lied to. Gideon's hand moved so fast Clara didn't see it coming. He grabbed her chin, fingers digging into her jaw, forcing her face up toward his. Listen carefully, he said, voice soft and terrible. You are here because I allow it. You will marry me because the contract demands it, and you will learn to obey because that is the only way this works. If you fight me, you will lose. If you run, I will find you. This ranch is 2 hours from the nearest town, surrounded by wilderness that will kill you faster than I ever would. You have nowhere to go, no one to help you. Your only choice is to accept what you are, mine. He released her. Clara stumbled back, hand going to her jaw where his fingers had been. Saturday, Gideon said. 4 days. Use them wisely. Clara left the office. walked blindly down the hall, up the stairs, into her small, cold room. She locked the door, pressed her back against it, slid down to sit on the floor with her knees drawn up and her face buried in her arms. She didn't cry. She was too angry to cry. This is war, she thought. He just declared it. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and rage and despair, something crystallized into certainty. She would not marry Gideon Mercer. She would escape this ranch. Or she would die trying, because some cages were too small to survive in, even if survival was all you'd ever learn to do. Clara stayed in her room until hunger forced her out. It was past noon when she finally unlocked the door and ventured downstairs, jaw still aching from where Gideon's fingers had dug in. The house was quiet except for distant sounds from the kitchen, pots clanging, water running, the mundane noises of a household that functioned whether she participated or not. She found the kitchen empty except for the young woman she'd seen the night before. The girl looked up from where she was kneading bread dough, flour dusting her forearms up to the elbows. She couldn't have been more than 18, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that were too old for her face. Miss Pike said you'd be down eventually. The girl wiped her hands on her apron. I'm Sarah. I cook and clean. There's stew on the stove if you're hungry. Clara's stomach twisted at the smell of beef and vegetables, reminding her she hadn't eaten since picking at dinner the night before. Thank you. Sarah ladled stew into a bowl, set it on the small table near the window where staff probably took their meals. She didn't sit, didn't make conversation, just returned to her bread dough and kept working. The silence felt deliberate, not hostile exactly, but careful. Clara ate slowly. The stew was good, better than good. Rich and well-seasoned, the kind of meal that spoke to someone who knew their way around a kitchen. She watched Sarah work, noting the efficient movements, the way her hands shaped the dough with practiced ease. How long have you worked here? Clara asked finally. Sarah's hands paused. 3 years. Do you like it? It's work. Sarah punched down the dough, began dividing it into loaves. Pays well. Better than town jobs. And Mr. Mercer? Is he fair? Sarah looked up then, really looked at Clara for the first time. Something passed across her face, pity, maybe, or recognition of a trap Clara was walking into blind. He pays on time, expects things done right, doesn't tolerate mistakes. She shaped a loaf with more force than necessary. Best advice? Do what you're told. Don't ask questions. Don't make trouble. And his first wife, did she make trouble? Sarah's expression shuddered completely. I need to get these in the oven. She turned away, conversation over. Clara finished her stew in silence, rinsed her bowl in the sink, and left Sarah to her bread. The message was clear. Whatever had happened to Gideon's first wife, nobody here would talk about it. Not to her. Maybe not to anyone. Clara spent the afternoon exploring the house, mapping exits and windows like a prisoner studying her cell. The front and back doors were the obvious routes, but both opened to areas visible from multiple outbuildings. The windows on the first floor were large enough to climb through, but again, too exposed. Second-floor windows offered more privacy, but a longer drop. She was examining the back hallway when Evelyn appeared, materializing so quietly Clara jumped. Mr. Mercer would like you to have this. Evelyn held out a dress box, the kind department stores used for expensive items. For the wedding, he had it sent from Billings. Clara took the box. It was heavier than she expected, the cardboard sturdy and new. I didn't ask for a dress. Mr. Mercer doesn't wait to be asked. Evelyn's tone was flat. He anticipates needs and addresses them. That's how he runs this ranch. Clara opened the box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a dress that probably cost more than Clara had earned in a year of scrubbing floors. Ivory silk, fitted bodice, lace at the collar, and cuffs. Beautiful. Expensive. Purchased by a man who thought money could buy anything, including compliance. It's lovely, Clara said, because Evelyn was watching her reaction. Try it on. Make sure it fits. Alterations can be done if necessary, but there isn't much time. Clara carried the box upstairs, closed her door, laid the dress on her bed, and stared at it. The fabric caught the afternoon light coming through her window, seemed to glow against the plain cotton coverlet. A bride's dress. A costume for playing a role Clara had no intention of performing. She tried it on anyway. The silk slid over her skin like water, cold and smooth. The fit was almost perfect. Whoever Gideon had sent measurements to had done their job well. Clara looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser, saw a young woman in an expensive dress, pale and hollow-eyed, bruise already forming on her jaw. She looked like a ghost. Clara stripped the dress off, hung it in the wardrobe where she wouldn't have to see it, and changed back into her blue cotton. The fabric felt rough after the silk, familiar and real. She needed real. Real was the only thing that might keep her sane. A knock at her door made her freeze. Yes? It's Thomas. Thomas Hargrove. I wondered if you'd like some company, if you're not busy. Clara opened the door. Thomas stood in the hallway, hat in hands, gentle eyes concerned behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked nervous, like he was breaking some unspoken rule just by being there. I thought you might appreciate a friendly face, he said quietly. This house can feel unwelcoming, especially for someone new. That's one word for it. Clara stepped back, let him in. Thomas glanced down the hallway before entering, checking to see if anyone was watching. The gesture told Clara everything about the atmosphere in this house. Even kindness had to be conducted in secret. Thomas perched on the edge of the room's single chair. Clara sat on the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I've worked for Mr. Mercer for 12 years, Thomas said finally. Came out here when the ranch was half this size. He's built something remarkable. I won't deny that. But remarkable doesn't always mean good. Clara's heart beat faster. What happened to his first wife? Thomas looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. Her name was Margaret. She was from Boston, educated family, came out here with ideas about how things should be. She and Gideon, he trailed off, choosing his words carefully. They didn't suit each other. She wanted partnership. He wanted obedience. She got pregnant within the first year. That should have been a blessing, but it became something else. What do you mean? Gideon became obsessed. The heir was all that mattered. Margaret's health, her comfort, her wishes, none of it compared to making sure that baby arrived safely. He controlled everything. What she ate, when she rested, where she could go. She wasn't allowed to leave the house during her last trimester. Said the risks were too great. Clara felt ice in her stomach. And then she fell down the stairs, 8 months along, broke her neck. The baby didn't survive either. Thomas met Clara's eyes. The doctor from Billings said it looked like an accident. Falls happen, especially late in pregnancy. But Margaret had tried to leave 3 times before. Each time Gideon found her, brought her back. And after the 3rd attempt, he started locking her bedroom door at night. For her safety, he said. The room felt smaller, colder. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. You think he killed her? I think he created conditions where dying was inevitable. Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. I think she tried to escape one last time, and this time he made sure she couldn't. Why didn't anyone say anything? Why didn't you... Say what? To who? Thomas's expression was anguished. This is Montana territory. The nearest law is in Billings, 2 hours away, and Sheriff Wade does business with Gideon. Owes him money, in fact. The judge who will perform your wedding ceremony has dinner with Gideon twice a month. There's no authority here except what Gideon allows. And everyone who works this ranch knows it. Clara stood, moved to the window. Outside, ranch hands worked in the corrals, moving cattle from one pen to another. Normal work, normal day. Everything functioning like Margaret had never existed, never died trying to be free. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Because you should know what you're walking into. Because I was too much of a coward to warn Margaret, and I've regretted it every day since. Thomas stood too, moved toward the door. And because I think you already know. I saw your face at breakfast. You figured out this isn't a marriage. It's imprisonment with legal papers. Then help me leave. Thomas stopped, hand on the doorknob. I can't. I've got a sister back east, 2 nephews. I send them money every month, lose this job, and they lose their home. Gideon knows that. It's why he hired me. He looked back at Clara, eyes full of an impotent sorrow that made her want to scream. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't help you. He left. Clara stood alone in her room with Thomas's confession hanging in the air like smoke, understanding finally settling into her bones. This ranch was a machine designed to crush anyone who didn't fit its gears. Margaret had learned that too late. Clara was learning it with 4 days left. She needed to find someone who would help. or find a way to help herself. Evening came cold and gray. Clara skipped dinner, claiming exhaustion from travel. She heard voices downstairs. Gideon's deep rumble, Warren's clipped responses, Evelyn's monotone, but couldn't make out words. Didn't want to. She stayed in her room until full dark, then ventured out when she was sure everyone had gone to bed. The house was different at night. Shadows pooled in corners. Floorboards creaked under her feet. Clara moved carefully down the hallway, down the stairs, toward Gideon's office. The door was closed, but not locked. She slipped inside. Moonlight through the window gave just enough illumination to see. Clara moved to the desk, began opening drawers quietly. Looking for what? She wasn't sure. Documents, plans, something that might tell her how to escape this place. The third drawer held files. Clara pulled them out, squinted at labels in the dim light. Ranch accounts, cattle records, employee files. And there, near the back, a folder labeled simply MM, Margaret Mercer. Clara's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, letters, medical records. She held them up to the moonlight, reading quickly. A letter from Margaret to her mother in Boston, dated 6 months before her death. Mother, I've made a terrible mistake. Gideon is not the man I thought. He's building a prison here and I'm the only inmate. I need to come home. Please send money for the train. Another letter, this one from Margaret's mother to Gideon. Mr. Mercer, your wife has written concerning letters suggesting marital discord. As her mother, I'm concerned for her welfare. I would like to visit. Gideon's reply, typed and cold. Mrs. Whitney, your daughter is healthy and well cared for. Her letters reflect the emotional instability common in pregnancy. A visit at this time would only agitate her condition further. I must insist you wait until after the birth. Medical notes from a doctor, examination dated 2 weeks before Margaret's death. Patient exhibits signs of severe anxiety and possible depression. Recommends bed rest and limited stimulation. Husband reports patient has attempted to leave the property multiple times. Suggests confinement to upstairs rooms for her own safety. The final document was a death certificate. Cause of death: accidental fall resulting in cervical fracture. Contributing factor: advanced pregnancy affecting balance and mobility. Signed by the same doctor who'd recommended her confinement. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, fighting nausea. Margaret hadn't just died. She'd been slowly suffocated by a system designed to control her, then killed when she tried to break free. And everyone had signed off on it, made it legal, made it disappear. Find what you're looking for? Clara spun. Warren stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight from the hall. She couldn't see his face, but his voice was amused. I couldn't sleep. Clara's mind raced, searching for an excuse. I wanted to read. Thought there might be books. In the desk drawers? Warren stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. That's a strange place to look for reading material. Clara carefully closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer. I should go back to my room. Not yet. Warren moved closer. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles, predatory. You're curious about Margaret. Everyone is at first. Let me save you some trouble. She was weak, couldn't handle the reality of frontier life. Gideon tried to help her, gave her everything, but she couldn't accept that some women aren't cut out for this kind of strength. She tried to leave. She tried to run. There's a difference. Warren leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Out here, running is suicide. Winter storms, mountain lions, bears, men who'd do worse than Gideon ever did. She would have died in the wilderness if she'd made it out. So really, Gideon saved her from herself. The fall was unfortunate, but inevitable. You helped him. Clara saw it suddenly, clearly. You helped him keep her here. Warren smiled. I helped run a ranch. Same thing I do now. Same thing I'll do after you and Gideon are married. Because that's the thing about this place. It's bigger than any one person. The ranch continues. The work continues. People are replaceable. The threat was naked now. Clara felt it wrap around her throat like hands. I'm going to bed. Good idea. Get your rest. Big day coming up Saturday. Warren moved aside, letting her pass. Oh, and Clara? Stay out of Gideon's office. He doesn't like people touching his things, and what Gideon doesn't like tends to end badly. Clara walked out, forcing herself not to run, back up the stairs, into her room. She locked the door and shoved the chair under the handle for good measure, then sat on the bed with her heart hammering and Margaret's letters echoing in her head. Mother, I've made a terrible mistake. Clara had made the same mistake, walked into the same trap, and she had 3 days left before the door closed forever. Morning brought frost on the windows and Evelyn's sharp knock at dawn. Breakfast in 20 minutes. Mr. Mercer expects your presence. Clara washed and dressed in a fog, exhaustion making her movements clumsy. She'd barely slept, mind churning through scenarios and plans, all of them ending in failure or death or both. The dining room held the same 4 people as before. Gideon at the head, coffee steaming in front of him, newspaper folded beside his plate. Warren to his right. Thomas across from Warren, eyes carefully on his food. Evelyn stood near the kitchen door like a sentinel. Clara took her seat. Sarah brought eggs and bacon, fresh bread, jam that smelled like summer berries. The food could have been sawdust for all Clara tasted it. We'll review household expectations today, Gideon said, not looking up from his newspaper. Evelyn will instruct you in your duties. Pay attention. I don't repeat myself. Yes, sir, Clara said, because silence felt dangerous. You'll also meet with Judge Hartford this afternoon. He's coming from Billings to review the marriage contract and explain the ceremony. Standard procedure, but required by territorial law. What if I have questions? Gideon looked up then. His eyes were flat. Ask Evelyn. She'll answer anything appropriate. And inappropriate questions? The table went silent. Warren stopped eating. Thomas hunched lower. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something tightened around her mouth. Gideon set down his newspaper with precise care. Are you trying to provoke me, Miss Mercer? I'm trying to understand what my life will be. Your life will be what I decide it is. That's how marriage works. The husband provides. The wife obeys. It's not complicated. Clara's fingers dug into her napkin. That's not how Margaret's life worked. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from the kitchen stopped. Warren went pale. Thomas closed his eyes. Evelyn took a sharp breath. Gideon stood slowly, walked around the table until he stood behind Clara's chair. She felt his presence like heat from a furnace, overwhelming and dangerous. You've been reading things you shouldn't read. His voice was quiet, deadly. You've been asking questions that aren't your concern. I warned you about this. Do I need to be more direct? Clara's hands shook. She pressed them flat on the table. I just want to understand. Gideon's hand came down on her shoulder, gripping hard enough to hurt. You want to understand? Fine. Margaret was my first attempt at building a proper household. She failed because she fought every expectation, every rule, every attempt to create order. The result was chaos, and chaos killed her. You can learn from her mistakes or repeat them. The choice is yours. He leaned down, mouth close to her ear. But make no mistake. If you follow her path, you'll reach her ending. Do we have an understanding? Clara couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She nodded. Gideon released her shoulder, returned to his seat, picked up his newspaper like nothing had happened. Good. Evelyn, begin her instruction after breakfast. Warren, I need you to check the north fence line. Thomas, the accounts from last month need reviewing. Life at Black Hollow Ranch returned to normal. Orders given and followed. The machine churning forward. Clara forced down her eggs, tasting nothing. After breakfast, Evelyn led Clara through the house like a general reviewing troops. Every room had rules. The parlor was for receiving guests, used only when Gideon approved visitors. The library was Gideon's private space, off limits unless specifically invited. The dining room required formal dress for dinner. The kitchen was Sarah's domain, though Clara would plan menus and approve expenses. You'll manage household accounts, Evelyn explained, showing Clara a ledger filled with neat columns of numbers. Food, supplies, staff wages. Mr. Mercer reviews everything monthly. Discrepancies displease him. What happens when he's displeased? Evelyn looked at her. Nothing you want to experience. Keep accurate records. Stay within budget. That's all you need to know. They moved upstairs. Evelyn showed Clara the master bedroom, Gideon's room, which would become their room after the wedding. It was large, dominated by a bed that looked like it could sleep 4 people. Heavy furniture, dark colors, windows facing the mountains. Mrs. Mercer's room is here. Evelyn opened a door across the hall. The room was empty except for dust and dead air. Whoever had cleaned out Margaret's belongings had done it thoroughly. Not even a picture remained, just blank walls and furniture waiting for the next occupant. Was this Margaret's room? Clara asked. Yes. Why the separate rooms? Mr. Mercer values his privacy. Separate quarters allow for that while maintaining the marriage structure. Or it allowed him to lock her in. Evelyn's expression cracked, just for a moment. Something that looked like pain flashed across her face before the iron control returned. Don't. Don't what? Don't mention the truth? Don't make this harder than it has to be. Evelyn moved to the window, looked out at the mountains. You think I don't know what happened here? You think I didn't hear Margaret crying at night, begging to go home? I know exactly what this place is. Then why do you stay? Because I'm 53 years old with no family and no other skills. Because I grew up in a workhouse in Philadelphia and spent 20 years in service before Gideon hired me. Because this is the best position I've ever had. And if I lose it, I'm back to scrubbing floors for pennies. Evelyn turned, eyes hard. We all make compromises to survive. Mine is staying silent. Yours will be different, but we all do what we must. Even if it means watching another woman die? Evelyn flinched. Margaret's death was an accident. You don't believe that. What I believe doesn't matter. Evelyn walked past Clara toward the door. The judge arrives at 2. Be in the parlor, dressed appropriately. And Miss Mercer, stop digging. Some graves are better left covered. Clara spent the next hours in her room, mind churning. Thomas wouldn't help because he couldn't risk his sister's welfare. Evelyn wouldn't help because she couldn't risk her livelihood. Sarah was too young and too trapped. Warren was actively working against her. That left Silas. The foreman had barely spoken to Clara since dropping her off that first night, but something in his eyes when he'd warned her that Gideon always wins, that felt different from the other's careful distance. Like maybe he was telling her to be careful. Like maybe he'd seen this before and regretted not stopping it. It was a thin hope, but it was all Clara had. Judge Hartford arrived precisely at 2, riding up to the house in a buggy driven by Silas. He was 60-ish, portly, with white hair and the jovial manner of someone who believed his own importance. Gideon met him at the door with handshakes and backslapping, treating him like an old friend. Because he was an old friend. Because everyone in power here was connected, tangled up in relationships that made justice impossible. Clara sat in the parlor wearing her blue cotton dress, hands folded in her lap like a good girl. Judge Hartford settled into a chair with a grunt, accepted whiskey from Gideon, and smiled at Clara like she was a child being given a treat. Well now, Miss Mercer, quite a journey you've made. Chicago to Montana. That's considerable distance. Yes, sir. And you understand the nature of the contract you're entering? Marriage is a serious commitment, especially out here on the frontier, no running home to mother when things get difficult. He chuckled at his own joke. Clara kept her expression neutral. I understand the contract. Good, good. Mr. Mercer's a respected man in these parts. Built this ranch from nothing. You're fortunate to be joining such a stable household. His first wife died? Judge Hartford's smile faltered. He glanced at Gideon, who watched Clara with those cold eyes. Yes, well, tragic accident, pregnancy complications. Happens more than we'd like out here, but that's not a reflection on Mr. Mercer's character, just the harsh reality of frontier life. She tried to leave multiple times. He locked her in her room. The judge's expression hardened. Young lady, I don't know what you've heard, but spreading malicious gossip is... It's not gossip. I read her letters. I read the medical reports. I know exactly what happened. Gideon stood. That's enough. Is it? Clara stood too, rage finally overwhelming fear. Because from where I'm sitting, this entire thing is a sham. That contract my father signed, he sold me. You bought me. And now you're going to go through some fake ceremony that makes it legal to imprison me the same way you imprisoned her. Judge Hartford set down his whiskey with a sharp crack. Miss Mercer, I came here as a courtesy to review the legal proceedings. But I won't sit here and listen to accusations against a respected member of this community. Mr. Mercer has broken no laws. The marriage contract is valid under territorial statute. Your father's signature binds you legally. Whether you like those facts is irrelevant. Even if I'm being forced, debt contracts are enforceable. Your father agreed to terms. You're fulfilling those terms. That's how the law works. That's how men owning women works. Judge Hartford stood, face flushed. I've heard enough. Mr. Mercer, I apologize for this display. I'll return Saturday for the ceremony. Perhaps by then the young lady will have remembered her manners. He stormed out. Gideon followed him to the door. Clara heard low voices, apologies, reassurances, the bonds between powerful men smoothing over inconvenient disruptions. Then Gideon returned. Clara braced herself, expected rage, violence, punishment for her outburst. Instead, Gideon just looked at her with something almost like disappointment. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. I'm offering you security, a home, position, everything women dream of, and you're spitting on it because you've romanticized some notion of independence that doesn't exist. Not for women. Not out here. I'd rather die free than live as property. Like Margaret? Clara's breath caught. Gideon moved closer. You think she was noble? She was foolish. Threw away everything I offered because she couldn't accept her role. And yes, she died. But not because I killed her. Because she couldn't stop fighting long enough to appreciate what she had. You locked her in her room. For her own safety. She was 8 months pregnant, trying to flee into wilderness that would have killed her in hours. What would you have had me do? Let her run? Watch her freeze to death in some mountain pass? Let her go home to her mother, so she could take my child away? My heir? Gideon's voice hardened. No. She made a commitment, carried my blood in her body. That gave me rights. There it was. The truth beneath everything. Not love, not marriage, just ownership, control. A man who believed his desire for legacy trumped everything else, including human life. Clara stepped back. I won't do this. I won't marry you. Yes, you will. Because the alternative is worse, and deep down you know it. Gideon turned toward the door. You have 2 days. Use them to come to terms with reality. Because Saturday you walk down those stairs in that dress I bought, and you say the words Judge Hartford requires. That's happening regardless of how you feel about it. He left Clara alone in the parlor with her rage and terror warring for dominance. She waited until sunset, until the ranch settled into evening routines, men returning from the pastures, smoke rising from bunkhouse chimneys, dinner preparations beginning in the kitchen. Then she slipped out the back door into twilight cold enough to make her breath visible. The barn smelled like hay and horses and leather. Clara moved through shadows between stalls looking for Silas. She found him near the tack room, checking saddles and bridles with the methodical attention of someone who'd done this work for decades. Mr. Boone. He looked up, unsurprised, like he'd been expecting her. Miss Mercer. I need to talk to you. Silas glanced toward the barn entrance, checking for witnesses, then nodded toward the back, where a storage room offered more privacy. Inside, surrounded by grain sacks and tools, Clara spoke quickly. I need help leaving. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever's safest. I have a little money from the travel allowance, enough for train fare if I can get to Billings. I just need someone to help me get off this property. Silas studied her face in the dimness. You know what you're asking? I know it's dangerous. I know Gideon will come after me, but I can't stay here. I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't be Margaret. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Pain, maybe, or memory. I worked for Gideon when he brought Margaret home. Watched what happened over the next 2 years. Watched her get smaller, quieter, until she wasn't hardly there anymore. And I did nothing. Then help me. If Gideon finds out I aided you, he'll kill me. Not quickly, not mercifully. He'll make it look like an accident, same as Margaret, but I'll be just as dead. Then we're careful. We plan it right. Silas shook his head slowly. There is no right. Every road off this ranch goes through open country where you'll be visible for miles. The train station's in Billings, 2 hours away, and Gideon knows every sheriff and deputy between here and there. You run, they'll bring you back before you reach the territorial line. Clara's hope crumbled. So I'm trapped. Not trapped, just playing a game where all the pieces belong to Gideon. Silas leaned against the wall, looking old and tired. But there might be a way. Might. I'm not promising anything. Tell me. Storm's coming. Big one, by the look of the sky. Should hit day after tomorrow, maybe Friday night. During a blizzard, visibility drops to nothing. Can't track what you can't see. But I can't see either. I'd freeze. Not if you know where you're going. There's a trail, old mining road, goes up into the mountains and comes out near a settlement called Silver Fork. Takes maybe 6 hours on horseback if you know the path. In a storm, nobody'd follow. Too dangerous. But I don't know the path. Silas looked at her for a long moment. I do. Clara's heart hammered. You'd help me. I'm still deciding. But if I do, you need to understand what you're risking. It's not just Gideon finding you. It's the cold, the storm, getting lost, falling, breaking your leg in the middle of nowhere. More people die in Montana from weather than from men. I'll take that risk, even if it means dying. Clara thought about Margaret's letters, about Gideon's hand on her shoulder, his voice promising control disguised as care, about the wedding dress hanging in her wardrobe, waiting to transform her into something she'd never be. Yes, she said. Even then, Silas nodded slowly. All right, but we do this my way. You follow my instructions exactly. No improvising, no panic. You trust me or this doesn't work. I trust you. Don't. Silas's voice was hard. Don't trust anyone here, including me. I'm helping because I'm tired of being a coward, not because I'm a hero. The moment this becomes too dangerous, I'll step back and let you handle it alone. Understood? Understood. Good. Silas moved toward the storage room door. Go back to the house. Act normal. Don't tell anyone. Don't write anything down. Friday night, if the storm hits like I think it will, I'll leave a lantern in the south barn window. That's your signal. Come to the barn at midnight. I'll have a horse ready and provisions packed. What about after? Where do I go from Silver Fork? Anywhere but here. Catch a train going east or west. Change your name, disappear, and never come back. Clara nodded, throat tight. Thank you. Thank me if you survive. Silas opened the door, checked the barn. Empty. Now get out of here before someone sees. Clara walked back to the house through darkness that felt less oppressive than before. She had a plan. A tiny, desperate, probably doomed plan, but something. A lantern in the window. Midnight. A horse and a storm, and 6 hours to freedom or death. 2 more days. She could survive 2 more days. Thursday crawled by like something wounded. Clara moved through the house in a fog of controlled terror, every moment weighted with the knowledge that escape was close enough to taste, but still impossibly far. She helped Sarah in the kitchen, learning recipes she'd never use. She sat with Evelyn reviewing household accounts she'd never manage. She nodded when spoken to, answered when questioned, played the role of compliant bride-to-be while her mind counted down hours. Gideon was gone most of the day, riding out with Warren to inspect cattle in the eastern pastures. Clara felt his absence like pressure lifting, could breathe deeper when he wasn't in the house watching her with those calculating eyes. But she also knew his absence was temporary. He'd return for dinner, and the performance would resume. The sky changed as afternoon wore toward evening. Clouds rolled in from the northwest, heavy and dark, moving fast on wind that bent the grass and rattled the windows. Clara watched from the kitchen while Sarah shaped biscuits, saw the weather building exactly as Silas had predicted. Storm's coming, Sarah said, following Clara's gaze. Big one. We get them this time of year. Late spring snow. Can drop 2 feet in a night and make the roads impassable for days. Days? Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. Sometimes longer. Last year we were snowed in for a week. Ranch becomes its own little world. Sarah slid the biscuits into the oven. Makes some folks nervous being cut off like that. But Mr. Mercer always stocks well. We never run short of supplies. Cut off, trapped. Exactly what Gideon wanted. His household sealed tight while he married the woman he'd purchased. No witnesses except the ones he controlled. Clara's hands clenched. Tomorrow night. The storm had to hold off until tomorrow night. Dinner was tense. Gideon returned mud-splattered and irritable, Warren matching his mood. They talked about fence repairs needed before winter, about cattle prices dropping in Billings, about a rancher 2 valleys over who'd lost half his herd to wolves. Business conversation that excluded Clara entirely, as if she was furniture that happened to occupy a chair. She didn't mind. Being invisible meant being ignored, and being ignored meant room to think, to plan, to count down the hours until Silas's lantern appeared in the barn window. The judge will arrive Saturday at 10, Gideon said, cutting his beef with precise motions. The ceremony will be brief. Witnesses will be household staff and Warren. After, we'll have a meal. Then business returns to normal. Business. That's all this was to him. A transaction. Clara swallowed bile and nodded. I assume you've prepared adequately. Gideon looked at her directly for the first time during the meal. Evelyn says you've been cooperative, learning your duties. Yes, sir? Good. I dislike disruptions. He returned his attention to his plate. The next few days will be busy. Stay out of the way unless needed. Of course. Warren smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. She's learning. Maybe this one will last longer than the first. The table went silent. Thomas stopped eating mid-bite. Evelyn's face went rigid. Even Gideon paused, knife and fork suspended. That was inappropriate, Gideon said quietly. Was it? Warren leaned back, clearly enjoying the discomfort he'd created. We're all thinking it. The girl's nervous, wondering if she'll end up like Margaret. Might as well address the elephant in the room. Warren, Gideon's voice dropped to something dangerous. Enough. I'm just saying, a little honesty might help. Margaret couldn't handle the expectations, simple as that. This one seems tougher, less delicate, better suited for frontier life. Clara felt rage wash through her, hot and clarifying. You talk about her like she was livestock that didn't perform well enough. Wasn't she? Warren's smile widened. That's what marriage is out here. Breeding stock, production. You think Gideon brought you all this way for companionship? He needs an heir. You're the vessel. Better you understand that now than discover it later. Gideon stood so fast his chair crashed backward. Get out. Warren blinked, smile faltering. What? I said get out. You're drunk and you're running your mouth, and I won't have it at my table. Gideon's voice was ice. Go sleep it off in the bunkhouse. Don't come back until you remember how to behave like something other than trash. Warren's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Clara thought he might argue, might push back. Then he stood, threw his napkin on his plate, and stalked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle dishes. Gideon righted his chair, sat, resumed eating like nothing had happened. Thomas, tomorrow I need you to review the quarterly projections. Sarah, the judge is particular about his meals. Make sure everything's prepared correctly. He glanced at Clara. You're excused. You look tired. Clara fled. Up the stairs, into her room, door locked and chair wedged under the handle. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to slow her breathing. Warren's words circled in her head. Breeding stock. Vessel. The casual cruelty of it. The honesty that everyone else pretended away. At least now she knew exactly what Gideon wanted. Not a wife? A womb with legs. She wouldn't be here to give it to him. Friday arrived with wind that howled around the house like something alive and furious. Clara woke to frost on her window, clouds so low they touched the mountain peaks. The temperature had dropped overnight, turning spring back into the tail end of winter. Perfect. She dressed carefully, layered her warmest clothes under her everyday dress, ate breakfast without tasting it. Gideon announced he'd be in his office all day handling paperwork, preparing for the judge's arrival tomorrow. Warren was conspicuously absent. Thomas worked on accounts in the library. Evelyn supervised Sarah's preparation of tomorrow's wedding meal. The house hummed with false normalcy, everyone pretending this was just another day instead of the last day before Clara disappeared into legal ownership. She spent the morning in her room organizing the few things she'd take. Not much. Money from the travel allowance Gideon had provided. Her mother's rosary wrapped in a handkerchief, a spare dress. Anything more would be suspicious. She'd have to leave everything else behind, including the expensive wedding dress hanging in the wardrobe like a ghost. Around noon, Clara heard Evelyn's voice in the hallway outside her door. Then a soft knock. Miss Mercer, may I come in? Clara opened the door. Evelyn stood in the hallway holding folded fabric, her expression unreadable. I brought you something. Evelyn entered, closed the door behind her. She unfolded the fabric, a heavy wool coat, dark brown, lined with flannel. It gets cold at night. Even in spring, you'll need this. Clara stared at the coat, at Evelyn's face. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. I know what Silas is planning. I saw you two in the barn. I'm not blind, and neither is anyone else who's been paying attention. Clara's heart stopped. Are you going to tell him? No. Evelyn set the coat on the bed. I'm going to help you, because I should have helped Margaret, and I didn't, and I've lived with that for a year. I won't make the same mistake twice. Why now? Why change your mind? Evelyn moved to the window, looked out at the storm building across the valley. Because Warren was right last night. Not about the breeding stock part, that was vile, but about honesty. We all pretend this is normal, a business arrangement, legal and proper. But it's not. It's slavery dressed up with marriage certificates, and I'm tired of being part of it. Clara felt something crack in her chest, relief mixed with terror. If Gideon finds out you helped, he won't, because you're going to be long gone before he realizes what happened. And even if he suspects he can't prove it, I'll be the loyal housekeeper, shocked and dismayed by your ungrateful flight. Evelyn turned back to Clara. But you need to understand what you're risking. The storm will be brutal. The trail's dangerous even in good weather. You could die out there. I know. And you still want to go? I have to. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then listen carefully. The horse Silas will give you is named Juniper. She's steady in bad weather, won't panic. Trust her instincts. If she stops, there's a reason. Don't force her forward. In the saddlebag, you'll find provisions for 3 days. Dried meat, hardtack, a canteen. There's also matches wrapped in oilcloth and a knife. Use them if you have to. I don't know how to use a knife. You stab with the pointed end. It's not complicated. Evelyn's expression was grim. In Silver Fork, find a woman named Ruth Calloway. She runs a boarding house on the main street. Tell her Evelyn Pike sent you. She'll help you disappear. She's done it before. Clara's throat tightened. How many women has she helped? Enough that she knows what she's doing. Ruth was in service herself once, worked for a man who thought ownership extended beyond working hours. She got out, made it west, decided to help others do the same. Evelyn pulled a small purse from her pocket, pressed it into Clara's hand. Take this. It's not much, maybe $40, but it'll get you train fare and a few nights lodging. I can't take your money. You can and you will. I've been saving for 15 years. I don't need it as much as you do. Evelyn's voice roughened. Margaret tried to escape with nothing but desperation. It wasn't enough. You'll have preparation, supplies, and help on the other end. Use them, survive. That's how you honor what happened to her. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just go. And when you're safe, when you've made it somewhere Gideon can't reach, live. Really live. Not just survive, but build something that's yours. That's the revenge Margaret never got. Evelyn left as quietly as she'd come. Clara sat on the bed holding the coat and the purse, feeling the weight of other women's courage flowing through her. Sarah bringing her food without questions. Thomas warning her about Gideon's nature. Silas risking his life to guide her through a storm. Evelyn giving her money and a path forward. She wasn't alone. She thought she was, but she wasn't. The realization didn't make the fear disappear, but it made it manageable. The afternoon dragged. Clara stayed in her room, claimed exhaustion from wedding preparations. Evelyn brought her lunch on a tray, said nothing about their earlier conversation, just set the food down and left. Through her window, Clara watched the storm gather, clouds dropping lower, wind picking up until trees bent and grass laid flat. By dinner time, the first snowflakes fell. Big wet flakes that stuck to everything, coating the ranch in white. Clara went downstairs because absence would be suspicious. Sat through another tense meal where Gideon reviewed tomorrow's schedule, and Warren, back from the bunkhouse, stayed sullenly silent. Storm should blow through by morning, Gideon said, cutting his roasted chicken with methodical precision. Roads might be difficult, but the judge has good horses. He'll make it. Clara said nothing. Let them believe the storm was an inconvenience, not an opportunity. After dinner, she claimed headache and retired early. Locked her door. Changed into her warmest dress, the dark wool she'd worn on the train from Omaha. Pulled on thick stockings, her sturdy boots. Wrapped the money and rosary in the spare dress and tied the bundle tight. Put on Evelyn's coat. It was too large, hung almost to her knees, but it was warm, and that was all that mattered. Then she waited. The house settled into night sounds. Footsteps overhead as Gideon retired to his room. The creak of floorboards in the hallway. Thomas's door closing. Eventually, silence except for wind howling around the eaves and snow ticking against the window. Clara watched the clock on her dresser. 10. 11. 11:30. At 1:45, she moved to the window, looked out toward the south barn. At first she saw nothing but snow and darkness. Then, there. A flicker of light in the barn window, a lantern, the signal. Clara's heart hammered. This was it, no going back. She pulled the coat tight, picked up her bundle, and moved to the door, eased the chair away from the handle, turned the lock slowly, wincing at every click. Opened the door. The hallway was dark, empty. Clara slipped out, closed the door behind her, moved toward the stairs. Each step felt impossibly loud despite the carpet runner. She paused at the top, listening. Nothing. Just wind and her own breathing. Down the stairs, through the foyer, into the kitchen where coals still glowed in the stove. The back door was right there, just 20 feet away. Clara crossed the distance, hand reaching for the handle. Going somewhere? Clara spun. Warren stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a lamp, his expression amused and dangerous. I needed air, couldn't sleep. In a coat and boots? With a bundle? Warren set the lamp on the counter, moved closer. You're a terrible liar, Clara, but I suppose that's not what Gideon bought you for. Clara's mind raced. I won't marry him. I'm leaving. No, you're not. Warren's voice was casual, almost bored. Because I'm going to wake Gideon, and he's going to lock you in your room until the ceremony, and then you'll be his property, and none of this will matter anymore. Why do you care? You hate me. You made that clear. I don't hate you. I don't care about you at all. Warren shrugged. But I care about the ranch, about the business. Gideon needs stability to maintain his empire. That means a wife who does her job. You running off disrupts everything. Can't have that. Clara backed toward the door. You can't stop me. Of course I can. Warren started forward. The kitchen door swung open. Evelyn stood there in her nightdress and robe, hair loose, holding a cast-iron skillet. Step away from her, Warren. Warren laughed. Evelyn, what a surprise. You're part of this? I'm ending it. Now move away or I'll crack your skull. You won't. Warren's confidence didn't waver. You're a coward. Always have been. That's why you stood by while Margaret died. Evelyn's face went white. Then she swung the skillet. Warren tried to dodge. Too slow. The iron connected with his temple with a sound like meat hitting stone. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, lamp shattering on the floor, oil spreading across the boards. Clara stared at Warren's unconscious form, at Evelyn standing over him with the skillet still raised, breathing hard. Is he dead? Clara whispered. Evelyn knelt, checked his pulse. No, but he'll have the devil's own headache when he wakes, and he'll talk. We don't have much time. She looked up at Clara. Run, now. Don't stop. Don't look back. Go. Clara moved, out the door into wind that hit like fists, snow already inches deep and falling faster. She could barely see the barn, just the lantern's glow diffused through white. Her boots crunched through fresh snow, wind stealing her breath. Behind her the house sat dark and massive, one window lit on the second floor, Gideon's room. Had he heard the commotion? Was he even now discovering Warren's body? Clara reached the barn, pulled the door open. Warm air heavy with horse smell rushed out. Silas stood in the center aisle, holding a bridled horse, Juniper, solid and calm despite the storm. The horse was saddled, saddlebags bulging. I heard something, Silas said, shouting. Warren found me. Evelyn knocked him out with a skillet. Silas cursed. Then we're out of time. Mount up. Clara put her foot in the stirrup, hauled herself into the saddle. She'd never ridden anything in her life. The height was terrifying, the horse huge beneath her. Juniper shifted, sensing her fear. Easy. Silas handed Clara the reins. She knows the trail better than you do. Trust her. I'll lead you to the path entrance, then you're on your own. The trail follows the creek bed up the mountain for about 2 miles, then cuts east through a pass. Stay on the trail, don't try shortcuts. In a storm, getting lost means dying. How will I know when I reach Silver Fork? The trail comes out above the town. You'll see lights, buildings. Head downhill and you'll hit the main street. Ruth Calloway's boarding house is the blue one. Can't miss it. Silas grabbed a horse for himself, swung up with the ease of decades. Stay close. We move fast. They rode out into the storm. Snow came down so thick Clara could barely see Silas 5 feet ahead. Wind screamed around them, tearing at her coat, stinging her face. Juniper plowed through drifts already knee-deep, following Silas's horse with sure-footed determination. Behind them, a light appeared in the ranch house. Another window lit. Then another. They'd discovered Warren. Any minute now, they'd realize Clara was gone. "Faster!" Silas shouted over the wind. They pushed into a gallop, snow flying from the horse's hooves. Clara gripped the saddle horn with both hands, every muscle clenched, certain she'd fall and break her neck. But Juniper stayed steady, powerful body moving beneath her, carrying her away from Black Hollow Ranch and everything it represented. The creek appeared out of the darkness, water black and fast over rocks. Silas followed it north, toward where the mountains rose in walls of shadow. Trees closed around them, pine and aspen bent under snow. The trail narrowed, forcing single file. A shout echoed from behind, faint, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable. Men's voices. Gideon had discovered her absence. "This is where I leave you," Silas yelled. He pointed up the creek. "Follow the water. 2 miles, maybe 3. You'll see where the trail cuts east. Don't miss it. Come with me," Clara shouted back. "He'll kill you for helping." "Maybe, but I'm old and tired, and I've got nothing left to lose. You've got your whole life. Now go, and don't make me regret this." Silas wheeled his horse around, headed back toward the ranch. Clara watched him disappear into snow and darkness. This man who'd risked everything for a girl he barely knew, because staying silent had eaten at him for too long. Then she turned Juniper upstream and rode into the mountains. The world became nothing but cold and white, and the sound of wind screaming through trees. Clara couldn't feel her hands anymore, couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. But Juniper kept moving, head down, following the creek with instincts Clara had to trust because she had nothing else. Time lost meaning. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. Clara's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her face felt frozen. She tucked her chin into the coat collar, closed her eyes against the snow, and let Juniper carry her. Behind them, voices. Closer than before. Through the storm, Clara heard shouting, heard horses crashing through underbrush. Gideon, Warren, ranch hands dragged from their beds to hunt escaped property. "Come on," Clara whispered to Juniper. "Please. Just a little farther." The horse pushed harder, sensing urgency. The creek narrowed, flowing faster. The trail steepened. Trees pressed close on both sides, branches heavy with snow. Clara ducked under a low-hanging limb, snow dumping down her neck, icy water shocking against her skin. More shouting. Definitely closer. They were gaining. Clara kicked Juniper's flanks, urging more speed. The horse responded, breaking into a rough gallop despite the terrain. The trail curved around a boulder, climbed sharply. Clara leaned forward, gripping mane and saddle horn, praying she wouldn't fall. The creek fell away to the left, dropping into a ravine Clara couldn't see but could hear, water rushing far below. The trail ran along the ravine edge, narrow and treacherous. One misstep and horse and rider would plunge into darkness. Juniper slowed, picking her way carefully. Behind them, torches appeared through the trees. 3, maybe 4. Close enough that Clara could see the light flickering. "There!" a man's voice. "I see her!" Juniper lunged forward. The trail curved right, climbing steeper. Clara's legs screamed. Her lungs burned. She couldn't do this, couldn't keep going. Her body was giving out. Then the trail opened up. The trees fell away and Clara found herself on an exposed ridge, wind hitting like a hammer, nothing but mountain on one side and empty air on the other. The pass. This had to be the pass Silas mentioned. Clara urged Juniper forward. The horse balked, ears flattened. "Please," Clara sobbed. "Please, we have to go." Juniper took a step. Another. The wind tried to push them sideways, over the edge. Clara leaned into it, holding on with everything she had. Snow obscured the trail completely now. She couldn't see where solid ground ended and the drop began. Behind her, torches emerged from the trees. Clara looked back, saw Gideon on his massive stallion, face twisted with rage even at this distance. Saw Warren beside him, holding a rifle. Warren raised the gun. "Go!" Clara screamed. Juniper broke into a run. The rifle cracked. Snow exploded to Clara's left. The horse surged forward, panic finally overwhelming training. The pass narrowed to barely wider than the horse. Drop on both sides now? Just trail and death. Another shot. This one closer. Clara felt the air move beside her head. Then Juniper was through the pass, trail widening, dropping down the other side of the ridge. Trees again. Blessed cover. The horse plunged down the slope, sliding in snow, somehow staying upright. Clara looked back one last time, saw torches at the pass entrance, saw them stop, saw the riders clustered there, arguing, gesturing. Gideon shouted something Clara couldn't hear. Then the torches turned back, going home, giving up. The pass was too dangerous in the storm. They couldn't follow without risking their own lives. And maybe Gideon had decided a dead runaway bride wasn't worth dying for. Or maybe he was calculating that the storm would kill Clara anyway, save him the trouble. Either way, they weren't following. Clara slumped in the saddle, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Juniper slowed to a walk, breathing hard, steam rising from her body. They'd made it. Through the pass, away from pursuers, into country Gideon couldn't control. Now they just had to survive the next 3 hours until Silver Fork. The descent was slower, less panicked. Juniper picked her way down the mountain trail with patient determination, stopping occasionally to test the ground, adjusting her path around obstacles Clara couldn't see. Clara let her make the decisions, too exhausted to do anything but hang on. Gradually the storm eased, the wind dropped. Snow still fell but lighter now, almost gentle. The trail widened, became easier. Trees opened up into meadows where snow lay smooth and unbroken. Then, through the darkness and snow, lights. Dim and distant, but unmistakable. Silver Fork. Clara nearly wept. Instead, she urged Juniper toward the lights, and the horse responded with what might have been relief. They emerged from the forest onto a road that showed wagon ruts under the snow, followed it downhill toward scattered buildings. The settlement was small, maybe 30 structures, a main street with shops and a saloon, houses clustered on side streets. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lamplight glowed in windows. Life. Safety. Escape. Clara rode down the main street, looking for Blue. There, a 2-story house near the end of the street, painted blue with white trim, a sign hanging from the porch that read, Calloway's Boarding House. Clara dismounted, legs nearly giving out. She tied Juniper to the porch rail, climbed the steps on shaking limbs, and knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. A woman stood there in a robe, holding a lamp, gray hair in a braid over one shoulder. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in Clara's snow-covered coat, her exhausted face, her terror barely held in check. "Ruth Calloway?" Clara's voice came out as a croak. "That's me. Evelyn Pike sent me, from Black Hollow Ranch. I need help." Ruth's expression didn't change. She stepped back, pulled the door wider. "Get inside before someone sees you." Clara stumbled into warmth that felt like salvation. Ruth closed the door, locked it, and turned to study Clara properly. "Evelyn's girl. I wondered if we'd see another one." Ruth set down the lamp. "You're half frozen. Come on, bath first, then food, then we talk about what comes next." Clara followed Ruth through a neat parlor into a kitchen where a fire burned low in the stove. Ruth stirred it higher, set a kettle on. "The horse?" Clara asked. "I'll have someone stable her in a minute. First priority is you. Strip off that wet coat before you catch your death." Clara obeyed, numb fingers fumbling with buttons. Ruth disappeared, returned with blankets and dry clothes, a simple dress, thick socks, a knitted shawl. "There's a washroom through there. Water's heating. Don't take too long or it'll be cold again." Clara washed in a basin of warm water, scrubbing away dirt and fear and the smell of the ranch. Changed into Ruth's borrowed clothes. Emerged to find food on the table. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, tea so hot it burned her tongue. She ate like she'd been starving for weeks. Maybe she had been. Ruth sat across from her, watching with the expression of someone who'd seen this before. Who knew exactly what Clara had run from, because she'd run from something similar herself. "How many?" Clara asked finally. "How many women have come through here?" "You're the 6th from Black Hollow. 12 total from various ranches and settlements." Ruth poured more tea. "Most make it east or west, start over. A few didn't survive the journey. The mountains take their share." "Does he come looking? Gideon?" "Sometimes, but I've got friends in this town. Sheriff, judge, most of the business owners. They know what I do, and they look the other way because their wives approve. Man shows up asking questions about a runaway bride. He gets no answers and a strong suggestion to leave." Clara felt something inside her chest crack open. Not quite hope. Not yet. But something close. What happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow we get you on a train. You got money? Clara pulled out Evelyn's purse. Ruth nodded approval. Good. That'll get you to San Francisco if you're smart. Big city, easy to disappear. I've got contacts there. Women who help newcomers get established. Work, housing, new names. Ruth leaned forward. But you need to understand something. Gideon Mercer is a powerful man. He's got reach. You can't just disappear to the next town over. You have to vanish completely. New name, new life, never looking back. Can you do that? Clara thought about Chicago, about her father's grave she'd never visit, about the few friends she'd left behind in boarding houses and factories, about everything that had made her Clara Mercer. Then she thought about Margaret's letters, about the wedding dress hanging in the wardrobe at Black Hollow Ranch, about Gideon's cold eyes promising ownership disguised as marriage. Yes, Clara said. I can do that. Good. Ruth stood. Come on, you need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Clara followed Ruth upstairs to a small bedroom with a real bed, clean sheets, a window that looked out at the snow-covered street. Ruth set the lamp on the nightstand. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. Nobody here will bother you, but old habits die hard. Ruth paused in the doorway. You did good, girl? Made it through when plenty don't? That takes spine. I had help? You did. But you're the one who got on that horse. You're the one who rode through the storm. Nobody can take that from you. Ruth left. Clara locked the door, climbed into bed with her clothes still on, and finally let herself cry. Not from fear or grief or even relief, just from the exhaustion of having survived something that could easily have killed her. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering her tracks, erasing evidence of her passage. By morning, she'd be gone. By evening, she'd be someone else. By next week, Clara Mercer would be a ghost story whispered at Black Hollow Ranch, another woman who tried to escape and vanished into legend. But Clara would be alive, changed, free. And somewhere in San Francisco, she'd build a life that belonged to no one but herself. Clara woke to voices downstairs and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, brain still caught in nightmare visions of Gideon's cold eyes and Warren's rifle. Then memory crashed back. Silver Fork, Ruth Calloway's boarding house, freedom bought with a midnight ride through a storm that should have killed her. She sat up, every muscle screaming protest. Her thighs felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. Her hands were blistered from gripping reins. When she tried to stand, her legs nearly buckled. A knock at the door made her freeze. It's Ruth. You decent? Yes. Ruth entered carrying a tray, eggs, toast, coffee that smelled like salvation. She set it on the nightstand and studied Clara with a practiced eye. You look like hell. I feel worse. That'll pass. Eat. Train leaves at noon. We need you fed and ready to move. Clara forced down the food, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. What if he comes? What if Gideon followed somehow? He didn't. Sheriff stopped by an hour ago. Said a man matching Gideon Mercer's description showed up at dawn asking about runaway horses. Sheriff told him no horses came through last night. Storm was too bad. Suggested he check ranches to the south. Ruth's smile was grim. Gideon left an hour ago, headed the wrong direction. By the time he figures it out, you'll be in Wyoming. Clara's hands shook as she lifted the coffee cup. What about Silas and Evelyn? Will they be safe? Can't say. Depends on what Gideon can prove. But they're adults who made their choices knowing the risks. Your job now is to make sure their sacrifice wasn't wasted. Ruth pulled a carpet bag from the corner, began packing Clara's borrowed clothes and the bundles she'd carried from the ranch. I've got contacts in San Francisco. Woman named Mei Lin Chen runs a boarding house in Chinatown, takes in girls who need fresh starts. She'll set you up with work, help you get established. But first you need a new name. Clara hadn't thought about that. A new name meant killing Clara Mercer completely, becoming someone else. The idea was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. How do I choose? Something simple. Common enough to blend in, but not so common it sounds fake. Think of someone you knew growing up, someone ordinary. Clara thought back to Chicago, to the factory district and boarding houses. There'd been a girl in school years ago. Claire Rowan. Quiet, studious, moved away when her father got work in Cincinnati. Nobody special, nobody memorable. Claire Rowan, Clara said. I'll be Claire Rowan. Ruth nodded approval. Good. Claire from Chicago, heading west for factory work. Your father died recently, no other family, looking for a new start. Simple story, hard to disprove. Practice it until it feels natural. For the next 2 hours, Claire rehearsed her new identity while Ruth gathered supplies. My name is Claire Rowan. I'm from Chicago. My father worked in the stockyards until he died last month. I'm heading to San Francisco for work in the garment factories. She repeated it until the words stopped feeling like lies and started feeling like armor. At 11:30, Ruth walked Clara to the train depot, a small building at the edge of town where the tracks cut through the valley. The platform was empty except for a clerk in the ticket office and an old man sleeping on a bench. Ruth bought Clara's ticket herself, counted out bills from her own pocket. I can pay, Clara protested. Evelyn gave me money. Save it. You'll need every cent in San Francisco. Ruth pressed the ticket into Clara's hand. This one's on me. Consider it an investment in your future. The train appeared around the bend, black smoke rising against blue sky. The storm had blown through completely, leaving the world scrubbed clean and blindingly bright. Snow melted in the morning sun, turning streets to mud. Clara turned to Ruth, throat tight. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Survive. Thrive. Build something good out of what happened to you. That's all the thanks I need. Ruth squeezed her shoulder. And Claire, if you ever find yourself in a position to help someone else escape, do it. Pass it forward. That's how we win. The train hissed to a stop. Clara climbed aboard, found a seat by the window. Watched Ruth standing on the platform until the train lurched forward and Silver Fork disappeared behind a curtain of trees and distance. Then she was alone with her new name and the vast uncertainty of what came next. The journey to San Francisco took 4 days. Claire now, she had to remember Claire, sat in third class with other travelers heading west. Working people mostly. Families seeking land. Men chasing gold or jobs or redemption. She kept to herself, spoke only when spoken to, practiced her story until it felt real. Nobody questioned her. A young woman traveling alone wasn't unusual anymore. The frontier was full of people running from something, starting over, pretending yesterday never happened. Claire Rowan was just one more ghost in a country built on reinvention. She watched America roll past her window. Wyoming's endless plains, Nevada's brutal desert. Finally, the Sierra Nevada mountains, green and massive, so different from Montana's peaks. Then descent into California's interior, golden hills and oak trees, warmth that felt foreign after weeks of cold. San Francisco appeared like something from a dream. The train pulled into the depot, and Claire stepped onto a platform packed with humanity. Chinese workers in traditional clothing, Mexican families speaking rapid Spanish, European immigrants in worn suits, everyone shouting and moving and alive with purpose. The noise was overwhelming after ranch silence. The smells, saltwater, fish, horses, unwashed bodies, cooking food, hit her like a wall. Claire stood frozen, carpet bag clutched to her chest, absolutely terrified. First time in the city? She turned. A woman about 30, dressed practically in a simple skirt and jacket, smiled at her. Chinese features, American accent, eyes that assessed Claire quickly and seemed to understand everything. I'm looking for Mei Lin Chen, Claire said. Ruth Calloway sent me. The woman's expression shifted to recognition. I'm Mei Lin. Ruth telegraphed ahead. Come on, before someone tries to sell you something. Claire followed Mei Lin through the depot chaos, out onto streets that made Chicago look peaceful. Buildings rose 4 and 5 stories, painted in colors Clara hadn't known existed. Cable cars clanged past. Carriages fought for space with pedestrians. Everything moved, pulsed, lived. This is San Francisco, Mei Lin said, navigating the crowd with practiced ease. Takes getting used to, but nobody here cares who you were, only who you are now. That makes it perfect for people like us. People like us? Runaways, escapees, women who decided being property wasn't acceptable. Mei Lin glanced back at Claire. Ruth told me about Montana, about the cattle baron. You're not the first to run from that kind of man. Won't be the last. They walked into Chinatown, into streets that felt like entering another country. Signs in Chinese characters, shops selling ingredients Claire didn't recognize, the smell of unfamiliar spices. Mei Lin's boarding house was a narrow three-story building wedged between a restaurant and a laundry. Inside, it was clean and spare, everything efficient. Room and board is $3 a week, Mei Lin explained, showing Claire to a small room on the second floor. That includes 2 meals. There's a garment factory 2 blocks over, always hiring, pays $9 a week if you're fast. Other girls here work various places, laundries, restaurants, domestic service. We help each other find jobs, cover for each other when needed. House rules are simple. No men upstairs. No drinking. No stealing. You work hard. Stay out of trouble. You can stay as long as you need. Bimkas. Claire set down her bag. The room was tiny, barely wider than the bed, with a washstand and a single chair. But it was hers. Nobody owned it. Nobody owned her. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Surviving isn't the same as living. That part's up to you. Mei Lin moved to the door. Dinner's at 6. Come down, meet the others. They'll help you get oriented. Dinner that night was rice and vegetables and pork cooked in a style Claire had never tasted, served family style around a long table. 8 other women lived in the house, ranging from teenagers to a woman in her 50s. They were Chinese, Irish, German, Mexican, a collection of histories and languages and reasons for being here. I'm Claire, she said when introductions went around. From Chicago, looking for factory work. Nobody asked questions beyond that. Everyone here understood that past was past. A girl named Anna, Irish and maybe 17, offered to take Claire to the garment factory the next morning. They'll hire you if you can sew a straight line. Work's boring but steady, better than most options. The factory was everything Anna promised, tedious, repetitive, exhausting. Claire sat at a machine 12 hours a day, stitching collars on men's shirts until her fingers cramped and her back ached. The pay was exactly $9 a week. After room and board and minimal expenses, she saved $4 weekly. It was brutal work. Claire hated it. And it was the most freedom she'd ever known. Weeks passed. Then months. Claire's body adjusted to the factory rhythm. Her hands grew calloused from the machines. She learned to navigate San Francisco's streets, learned which markets sold the cheapest food, learned how to blend into crowds so thoroughly she became invisible. She also learned fear didn't disappear just because you escaped. Late at night, lying in her narrow bed, Claire would wake in panic, convinced Gideon had found her, convinced Warren stood outside her door, convinced this entire new life was temporary and any moment the trap would spring closed again. But morning always came, and every morning she was still Claire Rowan, still free. 6 months after arriving in San Francisco, Claire was walking home from the factory when she saw the notice posted outside a bookshop. The Women's Legal Defense Association was holding a meeting about marriage contract reform. All interested women welcome. Claire stopped, staring at the poster. She should keep walking, keep her head down, stay invisible. Getting involved in reform work meant drawing attention, and attention was dangerous. But Margaret's face appeared in her mind, and Evelyn's, and Ruth's. Women who'd risked everything so Claire could be standing here reading about changing the laws that had nearly killed her. She went to the meeting. The gathering was held in a cramped office above a print shop, maybe 20 women sitting in mismatched chairs, listening to a woman named Catherine Morrison explain how territorial marriage laws allowed men to purchase wives through debt contracts, how these contracts were legal, how women had no recourse. We're gathering testimony, Catherine said. She was maybe 40, well-dressed, educated accent, the kind of woman who could have ignored these problems but chose not to. Anonymous accounts from women who've been trapped by these arrangements. We're building a legal case to bring before the territorial courts, but we need evidence. We need stories. Claire sat in the back, hands clenched in her lap. Around her, women shifted uncomfortably. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Nobody wanted to expose themselves. Finally, an older woman stood. My daughter. She was sent to a ranch in Oregon through one of these contracts. She wrote me once, said she was unhappy, then nothing. I never heard from her again. When I went looking, they told me she'd died in childbirth. But I don't believe them. Another woman spoke. Then another. Stories poured out. Daughters sold, sisters disappeared, friends trapped in situations that looked like marriage but felt like imprisonment. Claire listened with rage building in her chest, understanding finally that what happened to her wasn't unique. It was systematic, widespread, legal. "Does anyone else have testimony?" Catherine asked. Claire stood. Her legs shook. Her voice came out rough. "I was one of those contracts. Montana Territory. My father signed papers before he died, sold me to pay debts. The man who bought me, his first wife died trying to escape. They called it an accident, but everyone knew. He would have done the same to me if I hadn't run." The room went silent, all eyes on her. Claire felt exposed, vulnerable, wanted to sit down and disappear. Instead, she kept talking. "His name was Gideon Mercer. Black Hollow Ranch. He's still there, still buying women through contracts. And as long as it's legal, he'll keep doing it." Catherine moved closer, eyes intense. "Would you be willing to provide a written statement? Anonymous, if you prefer. Your testimony could be crucial." Claire thought about Gideon's cold certainty, about Warren's rifle, about the wedding dress still hanging in that wardrobe at Black Hollow Ranch, waiting for the next purchased bride. "Yes," she said, "I'll testify." The written testimony took hours. Catherine asked detailed questions. Claire answered, reliving every moment from the telegram arriving in Feldman's office to the midnight escape through the storm. She wrote about Margaret's letters, about Evelyn's complicity and final courage, about Thomas's impotent regret. She wrote about a system designed to trap women and profit from their captivity. When she finished, her hand ached and the pages were covered in her small, careful handwriting. Catherine read through everything, expression growing darker with each page. "This is important work," Catherine said finally. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak." "I'm not brave. I'm angry." "Same thing, often." Catherine filed the testimony carefully. "We're presenting to the territorial court in 3 months. If we can get even one of these contracts invalidated, it opens the door for more challenges. Change won't be fast, but it can happen." Claire left the office feeling lighter than she had in months. Like maybe running hadn't been the end. Maybe it had been a beginning. She threw herself into the reform work with the same intensity she'd brought to survival, attended every meeting, helped gather more testimonies, learned about law and politics and how to navigate systems designed to exclude women from power. Catherine became a mentor, teaching Claire how to research legal precedents, how to write persuasive arguments, how to speak to people with authority who didn't want to listen. "You have a gift for this," Catherine said one evening, reviewing Claire's draft of a petition. "Clear writing, logical arguments. You should consider more education, formal training." "I barely finished elementary school." "Formal education is overrated. You've got something better, lived experience and the intelligence to articulate it." Catherine set down the petition. "There's a women's college in Oakland. They take students regardless of background. I could write you a recommendation." The idea was ridiculous. Claire was a factory worker with a fake name, running from a man who still wanted her dead or imprisoned. She couldn't afford college, couldn't risk the exposure, but she also couldn't stop thinking about it, about learning, about transforming rage into knowledge, into power. She started saving differently, not just for survival, but for possibility. Worked extra shifts at the factory, took in mending on weekends. Every spare dollar went into a jar hidden under her bed. It would take years to save enough for even one semester, but years were something Claire had now, something she'd bought with that midnight ride. The territorial court hearing happened on a cold February morning. Claire sat in the gallery with dozens of other women, watching Catherine and 2 other lawyers argue that debt marriage contracts violated basic human rights. The opposing lawyers, all men, argued precedent, property rights, the sacred institution of marriage. The judge was old, stern, clearly uncomfortable with the entire proceeding. He listened for 3 hours, expression growing increasingly annoyed. Finally, he banged his gavel. "I'll issue a ruling within 30 days. This court is adjourned." The waiting was agony. Claire worked and studied and tried not to obsess over what the judge would decide. Catherine remained cautiously optimistic. "Even if we lose, we've created a record, planted seeds. Change happens slowly." But Claire wanted justice now, wanted every man like Gideon to face consequences, wanted every woman trapped in those contracts to wake up free. The ruling came on March 15, 1877. Claire was at the factory when Anna burst in, waving a newspaper. "We won! The judge struck down the debt marriage contracts." Claire grabbed the paper, hands shaking. The headline read, Territorial Court invalidates coercive marriage contracts. The article explained that Judge Harrison had ruled such contracts violated constitutional protections, that marriage required genuine consent from both parties, that debt could not be transferred through human beings. It was a narrow ruling, limited to the specific cases presented, but it was a crack in the wall. Claire walked out of the factory mid-shift, ignoring the supervisor's shouting, walked to Catherine's office and found chaos, women crying and laughing, champagne somehow acquired, everyone celebrating like they'd won a war. Maybe they had. A small battle, at least. "This is because of you," Catherine said, pulling Claire into an embrace. "Your testimony was the key. The judge cited it specifically in his ruling." Claire couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Somewhere in Montana, Gideon Mercer was learning that his preferred method of acquiring wives was no longer legal, that the contract he'd used to bind Clara was worthless, that his empire had limits after all. It wasn't enough. He should face prison, prosecution, consequences that matched his crimes. But it was something. It was light breaking through darkness. That night, Claire returned to her small room and allowed herself, finally, to cry. Not from fear or rage, but from relief. From the realization that she'd done more than survive. She'd fought back, changed something, made Margaret's death and Evelyn's courage and Silas's sacrifice mean something beyond one girl's escape. The years that followed were slower, harder work. The court ruling opened doors, but doors had to be walked through. Claire helped Catherine track down women still trapped by old contracts, helped them understand they could challenge their situations legally. Some succeeded. Many didn't. Money and power still mattered, and men like Gideon had both. But every woman who escaped was a victory. Every contract invalidated was progress. Claire saved enough money for one semester at the women's college. Then another. She studied law and politics and rhetoric, learning how to turn her anger into arguments that courts couldn't ignore. She was the oldest student in most classes, the only one with a factory job and a fake identity. Nobody cared. The Frontier College was full of unusual stories. She graduated 4 years later, the first in her family to finish any higher education. Catherine offered her a job immediately, legal assistant at the Women's Legal Defense Association. The pay was terrible. The work was exhausting. Claire accepted instantly. At 28, she changed her name legally, made Claire Rowan official. Clara Mercer was buried so deep nobody could resurrect her. The fear of Gideon finding her faded gradually, replaced by confidence born from competence. He'd moved on, presumably found another desperate woman to purchase. The world kept turning. Claire didn't forget, but she stopped letting the past define her present. She met Daniel Ortega at a reform meeting when she was 30. He was a lawyer too, Mexican immigrant, working to help laborers fight exploitative contracts. They argued about legal strategy over coffee, argued more over dinner, kept arguing through months of debates that gradually transformed into something else. "I should warn you," Claire said when things got serious. "My past is complicated." "Everyone's past is complicated," Daniel replied. "I care about who you are now, who you're becoming." They married 2 years later, a small ceremony with Catherine as witness. No contracts, no debts, just two people choosing each other freely, building partnership instead of ownership. Claire kept working. The reform movement grew, adding new issues, labor rights, voting rights, property rights. Claire threw herself into all of it, channeling decades of rage into productive change. She won some cases, lost others, learned that progress was measured in inches even when you wanted miles. News from Montana arrived occasionally through women escaping similar situations. Gideon Mercer was still ranching, still powerful, but his reputation was damaged. People whispered about him now, about his first wife and the second who escaped. Young women thought twice about contracts bearing his name. It wasn't justice, but it was something. Claire was 37 when she received a letter from Ruth Calloway. Brief, factual, delivered without drama. Gideon Mercer had died. Heart failure, died in his sleep, buried on his ranch. His empire would be divided among distant relatives. Black Hollow Ranch would probably be sold, broken into smaller parcels. Claire read the letter twice, felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Gideon had lived and died never facing real consequences for what he'd done to Margaret, to Clara, to however many other women his contracts had trapped. That was unjust. But Claire had stopped waiting for justice from the world and started creating it herself. She burned the letter, went back to work. The years kept passing. Claire rose through the legal profession, unusual for a woman, but not impossible anymore. She argued cases that shaped territorial law. She mentored younger women entering legal work. She watched San Francisco grow and change, watched women gain rights that had seemed impossible when she first arrived. At 52, Claire stood before the California Supreme Court arguing a case that would expand marriage protection statewide. She wore a tailored suit, spoke with authority earned through decades of work, made arguments built on precedents she'd helped establish. The judges ruled in her favor. Walking out of the courthouse, Daniel beside her, Claire thought about the terrified girl on a train to Montana, about the woman who'd ridden through a blizzard choosing death over captivity, about all the years and work and transformation between then and now. She'd survived. More than that, she'd built something. Not just a career or a marriage or a reputation, but a legacy of changed laws and freed women and a world slightly less brutal than the one she'd been born into. Margaret never got that chance. Evelyn spent her life enabling horror. Silas helped once when it mattered. Ruth and May Lynn created networks of escape. Catherine taught her how to channel pain into power. Claire had taken all of that, the sacrifice and courage and hard-won knowledge, and built something that would outlast her. Not perfect, not complete, but real. That evening, sitting in her modest home with Daniel and their collection of law books and case files, Claire allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd come west as property, bought and delivered like cattle. She'd leave the world as Claire Rowan, attorney and advocate, remembered not for what she escaped but for what she changed. It wasn't the story she'd expected, but it was hers, earned through every painful step from Chicago to Montana to San Francisco and beyond. And when history remembered her, if it remembered her at all, it would remember a woman who looked at an impossible system and decided it could be broken, who understood that survival wasn't enough, that real victory meant making sure the next generation of women never had to make the choices she'd made. The frightened girl sent west as property had become the woman who helped dismantle the machinery of ownership, not through revenge or violence, but through patient, relentless, unglamorous work that accumulated into transformation. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring, delivered to Claire's office by a young clerk who apologized for interrupting her work. Claire was 63 years old now, her hair more silver than brown, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a brief for yet another marriage rights case. The envelope was plain, postmarked from Montana territory, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. Mrs. Ortega, you don't know me. My name is Rebecca Marsh. I was the third woman Gideon Mercer purchased through a debt contract. I never made it off Black Hollow Ranch alive, not the way you did. But my daughter did. She's 16 now, living with my sister in Denver, and she doesn't know the full story of how her mother died. I'm writing this in case I don't survive childbirth. The doctor says it's risky, and Gideon won't let me leave for proper medical care. If something happens to me, I want someone to know it wasn't an accident, that it was never an accident. I read about your work in the newspapers, about the laws you changed. I want you to know it mattered. Even though it came too late for me, it mattered. The letter was dated 3 years earlier. Tucked inside was a newspaper clipping, an obituary. Rebecca Marsh died in childbirth at age 29, survived by a daughter and a sister, buried at Black Hollow Ranch. Claire set the letter down with shaking hands. Daniel, working at the adjacent desk, looked up immediately. What is it? Another one. Claire's voice came out flat, hollow. Another woman Gideon killed. This one knew about me, knew about the work. And it didn't save her. Daniel moved to her side, read the letter over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. When was this dated? 3 years ago. She's been dead 3 years, and I'm just now finding out. Claire stood abruptly, moved to the window. Their office overlooked Market Street, San Francisco, alive with cable cars and commerce and people living freely. He kept doing it. Even after the laws changed, he found ways around them. And I thought winning a few court cases meant something. It did mean something. It does. Daniel joined her at the window. How many women have we helped escape situations like hers? 50, 100. Not enough. Claire pressed her hand against the glass. Never enough. For everyone we save, there's another Rebecca Marsh dying in some godforsaken ranch because the law still has loopholes and men like Gideon know how to exploit them. So we close the loopholes. We keep working. I'm 63 years old, Daniel. How many more years do I have? How much more can one person do? Daniel turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. You've spent 40 years fighting this. You're allowed to be tired. But don't tell me it didn't matter. Don't let grief convince you that decades of work were worthless. Claire looked at her husband, this man who'd stood beside her through countless battles, who'd never once asked her to be smaller or quieter or more convenient, who'd chosen partnership when the world still expected ownership. What do we do about Rebecca's daughter? She asked quietly. We make sure she knows the truth, that her mother was brave, that she tried to survive, and we make damn sure she grows up in a world where her own daughters won't face the same choices. Claire nodded, returned to her desk, pulled out fresh paper and began writing to Rebecca's sister in Denver, explaining what her sister had endured, offering support, promising that Rebecca's story wouldn't be forgotten. Because that was the work. Not just changing laws, but remembering the women who didn't survive to see those changes. Bearing witness, making sure their deaths meant something. 2 weeks later, Claire received a response from Rebecca's sister, Martha. She was grateful for the letter, grateful someone knew the truth. She'd suspected Rebecca's death wasn't natural, but had no proof, no recourse. She was raising Rebecca's daughter Emma as her own, making sure the girl got education and opportunities her mother never had. Emma is smart, Martha wrote. She asks questions about her mother. I've told her sanitized versions, but she deserves better. Would you be willing to meet her? To tell her about the work you do? I think it would help her understand that her mother's death wasn't meaningless. Claire agreed immediately. She and Daniel traveled to Denver that summer, met Martha and Emma in a modest home on the city's eastern edge. Emma was tall and serious, with her mother's dark hair and eyes that assessed Claire with uncomfortable intelligence. You knew my mother? Emma asked. Not personally, but I knew what she was going through. I was in a similar situation once, a long time ago. And you escaped? Yes, but my mother didn't. It wasn't a question. Emma's voice was steady, controlled, but pain lurked underneath. Claire glanced at Martha, who nodded permission to be honest. Your mother tried. She was brave and clever, and she fought to survive. But the man who owned that ranch, and I use that word deliberately, owned, made sure she couldn't leave. The laws at the time protected him more than they protected her. And now? Now the laws are better. Not perfect, but better. Your mother's death was part of what pushed us to keep fighting for those changes. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want to study law. I want to help change the rest of those laws, the ones that still aren't fair. Claire felt something shift in her chest. Recognition, legacy passing forward. Then I'll help you. There are schools now that accept women, scholarships available. If you're serious, I'll make sure you get the education your mother never could. Emma's eyes blazed with an intensity Claire recognized, the particular fury of women who'd lost too much and refused to accept it as inevitable. I'm serious. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about legal strategies, about cases Claire had won and lost, about the grinding reality of trying to change systems designed to resist change. Emma absorbed everything, asked sharp questions, took notes in a journal already half filled with her own observations about injustice. Walking back to their hotel that evening, Daniel said quietly, You just recruited your successor. Maybe. If she's as stubborn as she seems. She's Rebecca's daughter and your protege. Stubborn is guaranteed. Daniel squeezed her hand. You know what this means? The work continues after you. You've built something that outlasts you. Claire thought about that. About the 40 years between escaping Black Hollow Ranch and standing in Martha's Denver parlor. About all the women she'd helped, all the laws she'd changed, all the battles won and lost. About Emma's fierce determination to carry it forward. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough. Not while women still died like Rebecca. But it was something. It was a foundation that the next generation could build on. Emma enrolled in law school the following year. Claire mentored her through letters and occasional visits, watching this brilliant, angry girl transform into a brilliant, angry woman with the skills to channel that anger productively. Emma's first case was representing a woman trapped in an abusive marriage, arguing successfully that the woman had the right to leave despite her husband's objections. The precedent expanded protections across 3 territories. "You taught her well," Catherine said. She was 80 now, mostly retired but still sharp as ever. "Though she's more aggressive than you were at that age, less patient. The world's changing faster. Patience isn't as necessary as it used to be." Claire watched Emma argue her third case, commanding the courtroom with confidence Claire had taken decades to develop. "She'll go farther than I did. She's got advantages I never had. Because you built those advantages. Because you and I and hundreds of others fought so the next generation wouldn't start from zero." Catherine leaned back in her seat. "Do you ever regret it? The marriage to Daniel instead of focusing solely on the work?" Claire considered that. She and Daniel had no children, a choice they'd made deliberately, knowing the work would consume most of their energy. But they'd built a partnership that sustained them both through decades of difficult battles. He'd supported her ambitions, never once suggesting she should be less than what she was. "No," Claire said finally. "I needed to prove I could choose. That marriage didn't have to mean ownership. That partnership was possible. If I'd avoided it entirely, Gideon would have won in a different way." Catherine nodded. "Balance. The thing women are always told to find but rarely given the space to achieve." Exactly. They won Emma's case. 3 months later, Emma won another, then another. She was building her own reputation, her own legacy. Claire watched with pride and relief, understanding finally that the work was larger than any one person. That movement survived because they passed from generation to generation, each cohort adding their own perspective and energy. Claire was 69 when her health started failing. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of decades wearing down her body. Arthritis made writing difficult. Her eyesight worsened. Energy that used to last all day now barely made it to lunch. Daniel, ever practical, suggested she reduce her caseload. "I'm not dead yet," Claire protested. "No, but you're exhausted. Let Emma and the younger lawyers handle the daily work. You can consult, advise, focus on the cases that really need your experience." It was good advice. Claire hated it. Hated admitting that time was finally catching up, that her body couldn't match her will anymore. But she reduced her hours, worked from home more often, saved her energy for the cases that mattered most. One of those cases arrived on a cold January morning. A woman named Helen Crawford, trapped by a modified debt contract that technically didn't violate the laws Claire had spent decades building. The contract used corporate structures and elaborate language to disguise what it really was: ownership dressed up as business partnership. "It's clever," Claire admitted, reviewing the documents. "Probably legal under current statute, but morally it's the same thing Gideon did to me 50 years ago." "Can we fight it?" Helen asked. She was 35, educated, should have had too much legal knowledge to fall into this trap. But desperation made people sign things they knew were wrong. Claire understood that intimately. "We can fight it. Whether we win," Claire set down the documents. "These contracts are evolving faster than the laws. Every time we close one loophole, they find another. But yes, we fight it." The case took 8 months. Claire worked longer hours than Daniel approved of, pushing her failing body because Helen deserved the same chance Claire had gotten. Emma joined as co-counsel, bringing energy and modern legal theory. Together they built an argument that the contract violated the spirit of existing law, even if the letter was ambiguous. The judge was young, progressive, appointed by a reform-minded governor. He ruled in Helen's favor, striking down the contract and establishing a broader precedent about economic coercion. "This is bigger than one woman's freedom," the judge wrote in his opinion. "This court recognizes that contracts can constitute imprisonment even when signed voluntarily, if that signature is extracted through desperation and enforced through economic power." Claire read the opinion 3 times, tears blurring her vision. It was everything she'd fought for, articulated better than she could have written it herself. The work was continuing, growing, becoming something larger than her original escape from Black Hollow Ranch. Helen hugged her after the ruling, sobbing with relief. "Thank you. You saved my life." "No," Claire said. "You saved your own life by fighting back. I just helped with the paperwork." But walking out of the courthouse, Daniel's arm supporting her, Claire allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She had saved lives. Not single-handedly, it had taken hundreds of people working together over decades. But her contribution mattered. Her escape from Montana had become a foundation that other women built on. That evening, sitting in their small garden while Daniel made dinner, Claire thought about the girl she'd been. 22 years old, terrified, signing papers that made her property because she couldn't see another option. That girl had believed survival was the highest goal achievable, had thought freedom was a luxury reserved for other people. She'd been wrong. Freedom was possible, but it wasn't given. It was taken, fought for, built piece by piece through work that never really ended. Claire was 73 when she argued her last case. Another woman, another elaborate contract, another man who thought money could buy ownership. Claire's hand shook now, even on good days, her voice rougher than it used to be. But when she stood before that judge and explained why the contract was unjust, some of the old fire returned. They won. Not just that case, but the broader principle behind it. California passed new legislation that closed the loopholes these modern contracts exploited. Other states followed. The cascade effect that Claire had been working toward for 50 years was finally happening at scale. "You did it," Catherine said. She was 93 now, mostly bedridden, but still sharp. Claire visited her weekly, brought news from the legal world. "You actually changed the rules. We did it. All of us." "Don't be modest now. You were the one who turned personal trauma into public advocacy, who refused to just survive quietly. That takes something special." Claire thought about that, about the anger that had sustained her through decades of difficult work, about how rage, properly channeled, could become the engine for transformation. "I think Margaret gave me something," she said slowly. "When I read her letters, saw what happened to her, I got angry enough that I couldn't just accept my own escape as enough. I had to make sure it meant something for other women too, so in a strange way her death made all of this possible." "Maybe," Catherine said. "Or maybe you were always going to be the kind of person who fought back. Margaret's story just gave you a target for that fight." They sat in comfortable silence, two old women who'd spent their lives battling systems designed to crush women like them. Who'd won enough battles that the world really was different now, even if it wasn't perfect. Catherine died 6 months later in her sleep. Claire spoke at the funeral, told stories about their decades of partnership, about cases won and lost, and the grinding satisfaction of incremental change. Looked out at the crowd, dozens of women whose lives had been touched by Catherine's work, younger lawyers who stood on foundations Catherine had helped pour. "She taught me that anger was a tool, not a weakness," Claire said. "That women had every right to be furious about injustice, and that fury could be transformed into action. She taught me patience when I wanted immediate results, and aggression when I was being too patient. She taught me that the work never ends, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing." Emma stood beside Claire at the graveside, silent support. At 30 now, she was already making her own mark on legal history, already training the next generation of advocates. The chain continued. Claire's health deteriorated slowly over the next few years. She worked from home, then from bed, finally just advising when Emma brought complicated cases that needed experienced perspective. Daniel stayed beside her through all of it, reading her articles from legal journals, telling her about cases being won using arguments she'd pioneered decades ago. "You should be proud," he said one evening. Claire was 79, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "You changed the world, not figuratively, literally changed it." "Not enough. Rebecca Marsh still died. How many others died while I was winning court cases?" "Too many, but fewer than would have died if you'd stayed silent. You can't save everyone, Claire, but you saved enough that it mattered." Claire knew he was right, but the weight of women she hadn't saved, couldn't save, would never be able to save. That weight never completely lifted. Emma visited often, bringing updates about her work. She'd argued successfully before the Supreme Court now, was being mentioned for judicial appointments. The angry girl who'd lost her mother to Gideon Mercer's cruelty had become a force reshaping American law. "I'm writing a book," Emma said during one visit, "about the history of marriage contract reform, about the women who fought for changes. Your story will be central. Use a pseudonym for me. I still don't like attention." "Too late for that. You're already in the history books." Emma smiled. "Besides, women need to know this history, need to know that the freedoms they take for granted were fought for, that nothing was inevitable." Claire understood that, had understood it for decades. History erased women constantly, pretended that progress happened naturally instead of through blood and sweat and unglamorous legal work. If telling her story prevented that erasure, she could tolerate the discomfort of attention. On a cool October evening, Claire asked Daniel to take her to the cemetery where Catherine was buried. She was 81 now, needed help walking, her body finally giving out after decades of use. They stood at Catherine's grave while Claire spoke quietly. "I think I'm done," she said. "Not giving up, just finished. The work continues without me now. I can rest." Daniel squeezed her hand, said nothing, understood that some conversations didn't need responses. Claire died 3 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep with Daniel beside her. The newspapers ran obituaries praising her legal work, her advocacy, her role in transforming marriage law across the Western territories. But the obituaries didn't capture what mattered most: the individual women who'd escaped because Claire had fought for legal protections, the daughters who'd grown up with freedoms their mothers never had, the cascade effect of one woman's refusal to accept her own oppression as inevitable. Emma organized the funeral. It was large, hundreds of people, women Claire had helped directly and indirectly, lawyers who'd learned from her example, politicians who'd passed legislation she'd championed. They told stories about Claire's fierceness, her patience, her absolute refusal to accept injustice as permanent. At the graveside, Emma spoke last. Claire used to say that anger was a gift if you used it correctly, that the key was transforming personal pain into public action. She lived that principle for 60 years, and because of that, thousands of women got to live free. That's her legacy, not just the laws she changed, but the understanding that one person can make a difference if they're stubborn enough and angry enough and brave enough to keep fighting when everyone says the battle's already lost. They buried Claire next to Catherine, two old warriors who'd spent their lives fighting the same war. Daniel visited their graves weekly, told them about cases being won using their strategies, about Emma's continued success, about the world that kept changing because they'd refused to accept things as they were. 3 years after Claire's death, Congress passed comprehensive legislation outlawing all forms of coercive marriage contracts nationwide. The bill was called the Rowan-Morrison Act, named for Claire and Catherine. Emma testified at the hearings, told stories about her mother Rebecca and about Claire's escape from Montana, made sure the legislators understood these weren't abstract principles, but real women's lives. The bill passed with bipartisan support. For the first time in American history, marriage required genuine consent documented without economic duress. The loopholes were closed. The system Claire had been fighting for 6 decades was finally, completely dismantled. Emma visited Claire's grave after the bill signing, sat on the grass beside the headstone, looked out at the cemetery stretching toward distant hills. "We did it," she said quietly. "Not perfectly. There are still problems, still work to do. But the foundation you built, it held, it grew. And now women have protections you could only dream of when you were running through that Montana blizzard." She thought about her mother, dead at 29, trying to survive what should never have been legal. About Margaret, dead on the stairs at Black Hollow Ranch. About all the women whose names were never recorded, who died quietly in situations the law permitted. "I wish you could have saved all of them," Emma said. "I wish your work had come early enough that my mother lived. But she didn't. And you can't save everyone. So instead you saved enough, changed enough, fought long enough that the rest of us could finish what you started. That's what legacy means." She stood, brushed grass from her skirt. She had a meeting in an hour, another case where a woman needed legal protection from a man who thought money entitled him to ownership. The work continued because it always continued. But now the workers stood on a foundation Claire and Catherine and hundreds of others had built through decades of grinding effort. 20 years after Claire's death, Montana finally erected a historical marker at the site where Black Hollow Ranch once stood. The ranch had been divided and sold after Gideon's death, the buildings eventually torn down, the land returned to open grazing. But the marker remained, explaining what had happened there. The text was carefully worded, described the practice of debt marriage contracts, explained how women had been trapped, noted that Gideon Mercer had been a prominent practitioner before such contracts were outlawed. It mentioned Margaret by name, and Rebecca, and Clara Mercer, who had become Claire Rowan, whose escape had sparked decades of reform. Emma attended the marker dedication. She was 58 now, a federal judge, still fighting for women's rights from the bench. She read the inscription and thought about the grandmother she'd never met, about Claire who'd become a surrogate grandmother, about all the women whose sacrifices had accumulated into freedom. Justice is slow, she said in her speech at the dedication. Painfully, frustratingly slow. Women died waiting for laws to catch up with basic human decency. But justice can happen if enough people refuse to accept injustice as permanent. Claire Rowan understood that. She took her personal trauma and turned it into a 60-year campaign to change the world. And she succeeded. Not completely. The work never ends completely. But enough that we're standing here today marking a place where women were once bought and sold, acknowledging that history and promising it will never happen again. But the crowd applauded. Emma looked out at the Montana landscape, mountains rising against blue sky, grass rippling in the wind. Beautiful country, brutal country. The kind of place that either destroyed you or made you stronger, depending on whether you had help. Claire had gotten help. From Evelyn and Silas and Ruth and Catherine and Daniel and hundreds of others. She'd accepted that help and then spent her life making sure the next generation had the same support. That was the lesson. Not that individual courage mattered, though it did. But that real change required networks of courage, systems of support, generations of sustained effort. Emma returned to San Francisco that evening, went to Claire's grave in the morning. The headstone was simple, just name and dates and a single line. She refused to accept no as final. I'm still refusing, Emma said. Still fighting. Still trying to close the gaps you didn't have time to close. The work continues, Claire. It always continues. But because of you, we're winning. Slowly, imperfectly, but winning. She placed flowers on the grave, touched the cold stone, and walked back to her car. She had cases to review, briefs to write, the endless grinding work of pushing justice forward one painful inch at a time. But as she drove through San Francisco's streets, Emma allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The frightened girl who'd once been sent west as cargo had become the woman who'd helped destroy an entire system of oppression. Not alone. Never alone. But her contribution had been crucial. Her refusal to accept captivity as inevitable had cascaded through decades, touching thousands of lives, reshaping legal structures. That was how change happened. Not through dramatic individual heroism, but through sustained collective effort built on foundations that people like Claire spent lifetimes pouring. Each generation adding their layer, building higher, extending the structure until it became strong enough to support real justice. Claire Rowan had been one woman, scared, angry, determined. She'd survived when survival seemed impossible. Then she'd refused to let survival be enough. She'd taken her trauma and transformed it into decades of exhausting work that made the world measurably better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And better was worth fighting for. That was her legacy. That was what mattered. Not the escape itself, but what she'd built afterward. Not surviving, but using survival as a platform for transformation. The girl sent west as property had died in that Montana blizzard. But the woman who emerged on the other side had lived long enough to see the machinery of ownership begin to crumble, had lived long enough to teach the next generation how to finish the demolition. That was victory, incomplete, imperfect, requiring continued effort, but victory nonetheless. And it had to be enough, because in the end, no one person could solve everything. But each person could solve something, could push the boundary a little farther, could make the path slightly easier for whoever came next. Claire had done that. Had pushed harder and farther than anyone expected, and the ripples from that pushing continued spreading long after she was gone, touching lives she'd never know about, creating freedoms she'd never see. That was immortality. Not living forever, but building something that outlasted you. Something that made forever slightly more just than it had been before. Claire Rowan had achieved that, had earned her rest. And the work she'd started would continue without her, carried forward by women who stood on her shoulders and reached even higher. That was enough. That was everything. That was how you changed the world. One stubborn refusal at a time. One hard-won victory at a time. One generation teaching the next until the work was finally done.